So this happened 7.5 years ago, June 23rd, 2016, while I was cleaning out my house. I was renting out a house for a year, and the year was almost up at this point. I wasn't going to be living there the next year, so it was time for me to start cleaning out and moving my stuff to my next place. The house that I had at the time was fairly small, but it was plenty of space just for me. I lived there by myself, and I just finished cleaning out the living room, other than some basic furniture, and I had moved on to clean the kitchen at this point. There were quite a few cabinets in this kitchen, so many that I didn't use a good number of them. I was looking through some of the ones that I didn't use to make sure that there was nothing that I had in them. One of them I opened up and I saw something in the back corner. It looked like some type of shirt or rag or something. I grabbed it and saw that I didn't think that it was mine. But when I moved it, it revealed a small white lever that I could just barely see. The cabinet was in the corner, sort of by the sink and halfway blocked by the stove. I honestly thought that it was just another pipe, but it just looked a little bit different to me, I suppose. I got inside and had to crawl inside the cabinet, which was pretty large. Once I got inside, I saw there was a small trapdoor to the side, leading into the wall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, you had to be completely inside in order to see the detail of it, and I decided to open the door, which led to an extremely narrow hallway with a sort of crawl space. But when I got further inside, I was horrified. I saw that there was food, as well as several blankets, as if someone had been living inside of there. The good news, at least to me, is that whoever was in there was obviously gone. I tried to make sense of it and figure out how long the person had been there, and how I didn't know about it. I was gone from the house a lot with work, I suppose, and other stuff, but I just didn't know how it was possible for someone to live in there without me knowing. In any case, I continued cleaning until it got pretty late, and the next day after work, I continued. I was still kind of in shock with finding a secret room in my house, and decided to look at it once again. I opened the cabinet and went inside, then I pulled the lever open just like I had the previous day. But this time, as soon as I opened it, I saw movement, and then saw a person for a split second. They slammed the door back shut on me, and I immediately turned and ran all the way out of my house to my car, and then called the police. I was so scared that I started driving away as well. I opened up my phone and told the police the whole situation. They came to my house a short time later to find that whoever had been in there was now gone. I was absolutely disgusted knowing that this random person had access to my house for who knows how long. It felt like a vivid nightmare that I needed to wake up from. When I opened my phone to call the police, it showed the date was June 23rd, 2016, and I still remember this date, 7 years later. It stayed with me like a scar that I don't know if I will ever really heal from. Luckily for me, I moved out the next week. I really don't know how long the person was living in my secret room, but thankfully it never gave me a problem. This happened in early February of 2005 in Concord, VA. I wasn't a true believer until, well, I saw what I saw. Even though it was almost 20 years ago now, it's something that I think about often. It literally changed my whole life in the matter of 5 seconds. Since then, I have also become somewhat sensitive to things that I can only explain as supernatural. So, let me set the scene. I was a super young mother to my first daughter who would turn 1 later that month. We used to live on this old curvy road where one end brings you to Lynchburg and the other to Appomattox. Like every morning back then, I was heading to Lynchburg, but of course I was speeding to make it on time to work for 5 in the morning. there was this part of the trip where it had super sharp curves that were snake-like, with an uphill at the end of the snake. There would always be huge packs of deer in this area, so you literally go 5 miles an hour with all the curviness, plus the deers. This strip of road didn't have any houses for at least 3 miles each way as well. Now, even though it was 20 years ago, I still remember every single little detail of this moment. Like the outside temperature was 17 degrees, to Usher's Confessions Part 2 was on the radio with the time being 4:43 in the morning. I remember the vanilla tree car freshener. I even remember what underwear I had on. Maybe that's too much information, but it's just kind of crazy that I even remember that stuff. In any case, I was speeding until I got to the stop of the snake and slowed to a basic crawl. But as I was entering the top of the snake, Usher started coming in and out of the speakers while my whole dash was slowly sort of dimming. Of course, I had a bit of a mini panic attack, thinking that my car was dying, but was confused because I still had plenty of power when I stepped on the gas. But by the second curve, I got the most intense feeling that I have ever had. I can only explain it as pain, sadness, fear, coldness, and just the feeling of being utterly lost. All I could do was bawl my eyes out, like a full-grown woman crying like a baby. And as I reached my last curve before the uphill, I saw him. I saw him leaning against the hill that was right next to the road. I first noticed his bare feet with his grey tattered pants. My first thought was, wait, it's the middle of winter. Where are this guy's shoes? But then I see his grey, thin, strange jacket, one that I'd never seen something like that before in my life. As I slowly made my gaze to his face, I realized suddenly that he didn't have a face, but rather just a shadow. I literally could make out every other detail but his face. It was just gone. Now, you know if you're going slow enough and you sort of hit your brakes, the red glow can see what's behind you in the mirrors? Well, this guy was just gone. And so were all those emotions that I had 2 seconds ago. I got out of there and drove on, and I made it to work, with only being 2 minutes late. That day after work, I decided to walk around downtown historical buildings, something I've never really done in the 5 months that I've worked there. That was the day that I learned what the Civil War soldiers actually looked like, and discovered my road was apparently used as a trail back in the day. I also had no clue that when a soldier would die, that they would steal anything useful off of the fallen soldiers. Now, I know what I saw that day, and I can't tell who or what side that soldier came from because even though I thought that I'd seen the color gray, it was really just a ghost, and I mean, do they even really have colors? I live about a 10 to 15 minute walk away from the beach, and I made a point to walk to the beach more since it's been so hot lately. Anyway, I was with my sister and we had just come back from the beach. We passed this weird-looking guy. He had scruffy hair and was wearing no shirt and giving a bit of a weird vibe. My dog, large German Shepherd, started going crazy though, barking and growling, and I had to get my sister to help hold my dog back from this guy. He said to me, "There's a big snake in the bush over there, you know," and pointed to it. I sort of nodded and we kept walking. He walked in the direction of the beach and we kept going on our way, but we started going a fair bit faster at this point because that guy was pretty creepy and we wanted to get out of there. We made it to this point where we have to wait a couple of minutes across the road because of cars, and that guy, I kid you not, comes out of the bushes, like emerges from nowhere. That means that he must have seen us, pretended to walk away, and then immediately cut through the bushes and started following us. We then started walking home, and he kept following us, sticking a few meters to the left. I then said in a loud voice, "I think that weird guy's following us," and he immediately turns around, walks up to this path that he already passed and goes up it. We were pretty sure that he was still watching us and following us, so we made a plan to go a different direction, so as not to let him know where we live. We did circles for a bit, and then we went to our house and told our parents about what had happened. They were obviously pretty concerned about the whole thing, and we did circles for a bit, and when we were confident that he was gone, we then went to our house and told our parents about what had happened. I was sleeping in my dorm room and I was alone, and suddenly I woke up in the middle of the night and I couldn't move. I've had sleep paralysis a few times before, so I didn't really care too much and I tried to fall back to sleep again. Also, I have my bed against the wall. After almost 20 or so seconds, I then started hearing footsteps which were coming from the other side of the wall. They were not normal footsteps though, they sounded like someone was jumping aggressively or walking in a very weird manner. I was still sort of paralyzed throughout the experience, but I tried to bang on the wall as I thought that the girl from the other room is doing it intentionally. So I tried moving my hand, but I failed. Then I could hear those footsteps in the front of my bed, in my feet's direction, and they were ascending towards my head side. I could hear loud breathing now, and at that, I started to get scared. I had another bed on my right side, which was empty. I looked through the side of my eye, and I could see the mattress, which had dents on it, as if someone was standing on the bed, and suddenly I could feel that someone had just started jumping on that bed aggressively. I was absolutely terrified, and I was about to have a heart attack then and there, it felt, but slowly, I got released from, well, the paralysis, I guess you could say, and I could still see those feet jumping on that bed, though. I suddenly started chanting some mantras, and it then disappeared and the curtains moved. I checked the time, and it was 3:45 in the morning. I sat there for a bit, rubbing my eyes and wondering if I had just seen what I had seen. I still get shivers when I share this. I'm a religious person and I didn't really believe in the paranormal, but I am 1,000% sure that there was something very bad and very negative there that day, jumping on that bed. I could sense the negativity around me for the entire time, and I have never felt this sort of negativity ever in my entire life. Long ago, on a pretty terrifying night, I had the most chilling experience that I have ever had. I was 15 years old, living in a small, quiet town where everybody knew each other. It was a peaceful place, or so I thought at least, until that night. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me in the care of my older sister, Emma. She was 16 and loved the idea of being in charge. That night, we decided to watch a movie, and halfway through, there was a knock at the door. Emma paused the movie. We thought that it was just a neighbor or a friend perhaps, but when she opened the door, there was nobody there. We shrugged it off and went back to watch our movie. We weren't too bothered because we thought that it was just some of the other kids playing pranks or whatever. Later that night, I woke up to a weird tapping sound on my window. I must admit that I was a bit scared because of the dark, but I mustered up the courage to peek through the blinds. And there, in the dim moonlight, I saw someone or something in all black standing in our backyard just staring at the house. Upon seeing the figure, my heart began to race. I ran to Emma's room and I woke her up. When we both looked again, the figure was gone. The next day, we told our parents about the incident, but they said that it was probably just a lost traveler or maybe a neighbor's guest or whatever. But I couldn't shake off the feeling that something just wasn't right. The following night, the tapping, it returned, more persistent this time. It sounded like someone was intentionally trying to scare us at this point. I told Emma and she called our parents, but there was no answer. We were alone again and we were scared. Emma decided to call the police, but as soon as she picked up the phone, the tapping stopped. We felt relieved, but still a bit uneasy. We tried to sleep, but a sudden loud bang from downstairs jolted us both awake. Emma quickly grabbed a flashlight, and we tiptoed downstairs to see what the noise was. The living room was just a mess. Books from the shelves were thrown onto the floor, the couch cushions were scattered everywhere, and then we heard a whisper, a faint, eerie voice coming from the kitchen. It was singing a slow, sort of haunting tune. Emma signaled for us to sneak back upstairs, but as we turned, the kitchen light flicked on by itself. Upon seeing that, we bolted upstairs, locked ourselves in my room, and pushed my dresser against the door. We huddled together, listening as footsteps started coming up the stairs, slow and heavy. They stopped right outside of my room. The doorknob rattled gently, then more violently. We were trembling, holding each other tightly. The house then went silent for a moment. Then, a voice, soft and raspy, spoke from the other side of the door. "I know you're in there," it said. We did not dare to respond. Then the sound of footsteps receded. We stayed awake the whole night. We were scared to even breathe, to be honest. In the morning, our parents came back and found us asleep in my room, the dresser still blocking the door. We explained everything and they called the police. The officers found no sign of forced entry, but they did find footprints outside, beneath my window and around the house. After that incident, my parents installed security cameras and an alarm system. The police patrols in our area increased as well, but the scariest part was that they never really caught anyone. Sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear a faint tapping and I freeze, wondering if it's just my imagination or if whatever that was has returned. This was during the pandemic in San Francisco. The streets were a lot more bare than usual that day. I had recently moved to my new apartment in Nob Hill from the notorious Tenderloin district, which actually wasn't as terrible as it said, but I was still very happy to leave nevertheless. One night though, I was feeling a little bit nostalgic and missing the beer prices, so I wandered the street down to TL. I always wear headphones while walking, but this evening there was an inner voice that told me to turn them down and keep my eyes out. It was about 10 p.m. and I listened to that voice, but with little caution. I got down to my old hood, deep within the craziness where the only sign of the pandemic was masks on everybody's faces. I buy my 40 ounce of St. Ides and I head back up the steep hill to California Street to get home. Lo and behold, a few blocks out of the hood, I feel this dude behind me first. Even though the sidewalk is completely empty, I move to the side to let him pass, but guess what? He doesn't. I turn to see, well, his junk in his hand, trying to rub it all up on me. I scream at him and he scurries like a roach into the shadows. Mind you, the streets are getting real steep at this point. He's a bit chubby, so I'm like, let's book it up these hills. I get a few blocks up and like 30 floors later and no one is behind me. I breathe a sigh of relief and maybe I can just walk home now. When all of a sudden, like the Terminator, I swear, he appears from beneath the streetlight and starts coming after me faster than ever. I pick up my pace, feeling like I'm in the worst dream ever or some horror movie, but then realize that what I'm doing is the wrong move. So I stop. And I start screaming, but look around and there's not a soul. The streets were completely dead, and that really scared me. He started cornering me into this wall with his junk still out, and suddenly I remember to act like I saw a bear, like be big and yell, make them afraid of you. So I made myself as big as I could and crazy and pulled out my 40-ounce bottle and I said, "I'm going to kill you." I did end up with a few scratches and bruises, but it worked. That creep eventually ran off. Even still, I ran off scared as well, looking behind me every other moment, until I got to my favorite place, Ina Coolbrith Park, and I waited, shaking until I was sure that that psycho wasn't following me before I went home. Moral of the story, I suppose? Treat your aggressor like a bear, if you can. So about 5 years ago now, I lived in a flat. I'm from the UK, so a flat is basically an apartment. It was just me and my dad that lived there, and my dad has always been a workaholic, so he was away for weeks at a time. Weeks alone, which I'd have to fend for myself at 13. I didn't have any issue with this, to be honest, as I loved the independence, and I loved feeling like I had my own place as well. But I'll admit that I was a little bit lonely. I mean, I didn't have any friends at the time, my parents had just separated, and my mum didn't want much to do with either of us, so I never really saw her. Anyway, a couple of months after moving in, I was home alone. My dad had just gone away for work for whatever reasons, and he wouldn't be back until the weekend. Everything was going fine. There were no issues at all until I got tired and I went to bed that night. I wasn't deliriously tired or anything. I am an insomniac though, so sleep just sort of evades me most of the time. What I mean is that I'll feel tired until my head hits the pillow and then my brain comes to life and just will not shut off. But I shut all the lights off, got into bed, and I looked over at the foot of it. And when I did, that's when I noticed that something was stood there. It wasn't a person, and there were no features. It was just some sort of, shadow, stood, not moving, at the end of my bed. I freaked out, obviously, and tried the whole thing of closing my eyes and opening them, etc. He disappeared when I opened them again, but I could still feel eyes on me. Naturally, I assumed that I was just paranoid about being home alone, even though I was completely used to it at this point, and never freaked out or worried about it before. So I put the light back on and I went to sleep. I tried not to think about it, went to school the next day, just got on with life, stuff like that. I mean, I've always had a strong imagination anyway, so it was probably all just in my head. But he was there the next night too, stood at the foot of my bed, looking at me. I could feel his eyes on me before I saw him. He had no face, just some sort of silhouette, but I could feel it. I don't know how else to describe the way it felt, but the way I knew something was there was weird, even if I wasn't looking at it at first. It was terrifying, but I felt comforted maybe, almost by him being there. It didn't feel like this shadow wanted to kill me or whatever, more like he was watching over me perhaps. I don't know, it's weird and I've never been able to properly explain it. I've always brushed this off as just some kind of sleep paralysis, but I was never asleep when I saw him. I was never tired or unable to move, never fresh from a nap or something like that. I'd be fully conscious and he would just suddenly be there. Like I said, he wasn't threatening and I learned to live with it. Seeing him whenever the lights went out and I was home alone was always a bit of a fright, but I got used to it. But then, the second one appeared. The second one was smaller, and the only way that I can describe it is by saying that he reminded me vividly of the mum from Hereditary, when she's crouched on the ceiling. He stayed in my peripheral at all times as well, which was very unnerving, and he first started showing up in the bathroom. I'd be using the toilet and he would be there, waiting for me. He felt threatening, like he was ready to pounce at any given moment, and it panicked me so badly that I often refused to use the bathroom, wash myself or brush my teeth, because he was always in there, even when the light was on. The worst part, though, was that I could hear his feet against the ceiling as he sort of chased me whenever I ran out of the bathroom, like the sound of someone running after you, but his hands and feet were against the ceiling, so it was more like an animal chasing you. I was absolutely terrified of him, and I never got used to it. I lost a lot of sleep over that period of time and continued for about 6 months, until suddenly they just stopped. I didn't see either of the shadow things anymore, and to this day have never been able to explain what the heck it was. I've spoken with counselors about it, and their only response is that it's some way of my brain coping with neglect or something like that. But I just cannot help but feel like it really wasn't purely my imagination. Who knows, maybe I am crazy, or maybe there is some sort of psychological reason behind it, but I will never be able to forget the sound of rapid footsteps behind me like that, or the feeling of eyes crawling all over me like 1,000 bugs as I slept. I've since stopped talking to friends about it because they think that I'm an undiagnosed schizophrenic or something. But there's something inside of me that just cannot accept my imagination curating all of that. So, am I crazy? And if I'm not, well, what the heck were they? I'm a girl living in Northern Europe. I won't go into too much detail as to where this happened because I don't want people to recognize me from this story. This story, though, takes place in October when I had a part-time job in this research center. This was in a bigger city, not like in the middle of it, but it was a 30-minute bus ride from where I lived at the time. Keep in mind, too, that the workplace was in an industrial estate, so the only people that really spent time in the area were the workers from these companies. I worked all 3 shifts, morning, evenings, and nights, but I did mostly night shifts because none of my co-workers really wanted them, and I'm a bit of a night owl anyway, so that 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift worked really well for me. Now, this happened on one of those night shifts. It was a Thursday night, and I was one of the 3 workers there that night. We didn't work together. We all were in our own sort of departments doing different kinds of work, also far from each other in the building. I worked at a chem lab doing water analysis, so it was not any kind of customer service job. We were basically all alone, and it got usually really quiet and rather peaceful. We had no security guards, but it was pretty much impossible to enter the building without an identification card. All doors were locked, and everyone that worked there had these cards where you hold it in the sensor on the door and it opens. You also got to use the card when leaving the building as well. These locked doors were not only on the outside, but also on the inside of the building as well. So if anyone somehow managed to get through the first door without the card, they couldn't really get any further into the building, to the labs for example. The door locks again immediately after you get in or out as well. Considering all of that, we never really had to worry about someone uninvited getting in, even in the nighttime. This particular night, I took a bus and headed to work. I greeted my co-workers that were leaving as their shifts had just ended, and met the other night shifters in the women's dressing room. All normal, I was in a good mood, and so were my 2 co-workers. When our shift started, we parted our ways and went to different labs. I was 3 hours into my shift at 1 a.m. when I decided that I needed to take a 20-minute break. The 2 co-workers had went to their break earlier than me, so I had to go alone this time. Our break room was this sort of lounge area where there was a couple of long tables, chairs, mini kitchen, and a bathroom. I'm not gonna lie, this big hall with old flickering ceiling lights was not my favorite place to be alone at 1 in the morning, when the whole building is almost empty and it's pitch black outside. There were big windows in the lounge, but I couldn't see anything out of them, just darkness pretty much. There was always this same eerie vibe at night, so I was used to it, I guess. 5 minutes into my break, I decided that I was going to go outside to smoke a cigarette. I put on a jacket, took my stuff with me, and opened the door with the card. Now, we had this sort of smoking place in the back of the parking lot, about 1 minute walk from the door. If I said I wasn't scared to be alone in an empty parking lot at night as a young girl, I definitely would be lying. This was the only thing I really did not like about the night shifts, but I really needed that cigarette. Nothing bad had ever happened before, and I live in a generally safe country, so I basically just hoped for the best. But there was this really nasty-looking white plastic chair in the smoking place. I sat in it and I lit my cigarette. From the smoking place, I could see clearly to the entrance of the building. There were bright lights above the door. Usually, I just stared at that door without even noticing it. I mean, it was a night in the industrial estate area, and there were not many interesting things to really look at. When all of a sudden, I noticed a person walking up to the door. It was a man in a trench coat and a top hat, holding a briefcase. I had never seen this man before, in my work or anywhere near this place. This man stood still in front of the door, not moving at all, facing the door. Even though nothing seemingly bad had happened yet, just a weird man standing by the door, I cannot even explain in words how scared I suddenly become. I had to somehow get past that man to get back inside. He doesn't know that I'm here, he didn't see me, but what if he does something to me when I'm trying to get inside? Is he trying to get inside? What does he want, and who is he? This was the only door where I could enter the building from outside, so really I had no choice but to try and ignore that man on the door and get inside. But what on earth is this weirdly dressed man doing in this area, at 1 o'clock in the morning of all times? There is clearly something that he wanted from us, and I wasn't even sure if I wanted to know what that was. I started walking towards the man in the door while he was still standing, not knowing that I'm here in the parking lot. The closer that I got, though, the more scared I got. I had to stop and think again. I knew that it was part of my job to confront unwanted people, trying to get in and tell them how to contact our customer services, but keep in mind, this is 1 in the morning. A weird man who appeared out of thin air and an 18-year-old girl alone. I had this gut feeling that I should not go to that door. I decided to call my coworker that was there that night and ask if she could meet me at the door and let me in, so I didn't need to face this man alone. So I went and hid behind my coworker's car that was in a parking lot to make a call. I was hiding behind the car in this position where I could still see this man through the car windows. I wanted to see if he would leave, and if he did, where he would go. My coworker answers the call, and when I start whispering in the phone and explaining the situation, I watch in horror as the man turns around and stares right at the car that I was now hiding behind. I don't know if he actually saw me. I don't think that he did, but he for sure heard that there was a woman talking behind this car. And what happened next was honestly straight out of a horror film. When this man found out that there was someone behind the car, he started slowly and quietly approaching me, not knowing that I could see him through the window. But here's the thing, he didn't walk, he didn't run. Instead, he was on all fours, crawling towards the car. I couldn't even scream. I just froze from fear and the phone dropped from my hand. When this man was getting closer to the car, I see both of my coworkers opening the door, waving and screaming at me to run and come in. And they did not need to tell me twice. I ran inside quickly, so fast the man didn't even have time to react. And when he got up and started running after me, the door was suddenly closed. The second that he heard the door lock itself, he then just suddenly turned around and started speed walking away, eventually disappearing into the darkness. We called the cops immediately, and they came not long after. They didn't find anything or anyone. That man just disappeared as fast as he had appeared. and no one has seen him since. After the shift, my co-workers walked me to the bus stop and they waited with me till the bus arrived, making sure that I got home safely. I am forever thankful though to these lovely women for opening the door for me before that man got me, and who knows what he would have done to me. I haven't done any night shifts after that, and for sure I never will ever again. I've lived on this property since I was 2 years old, and when I was little, I thought that it was normal to play with people who weren't really there. I thought that it was normal to play with people who weren't really there. I guess I chalked it up to being what imaginary friends meant. As I got older, I stopped playing so much. I got tired and was a typical moody teen. But I never mentally stopped thinking of the people that I played with as spirits and ghosts. I also never told anyone about this. But here's where things got weirder. I'm mentally ill and I experience hallucinations. I also have a form of dissociative identity disorder. At the time, I was the only personality and I had just started recovering memory of being a system, trauma reasons. So when I started hallucinating figures and feeling people in my head, I thought it was just the system reforming. Around the same time, my older brother's life partner came to visit. She actually sees an FBI psychic fairly often apparently, and for years the psychic had been asking if she knew of a specific property. You may see where this is going, but sure enough, the property that they'd been talking about for years is the same one that I grew up on and live on still. A fun fact about the area that we live, we're only a few miles away from the old asylum. It is appropriately spooky feeling, even if it looks normal, but the FBI psychic and my sister-in-law asked to do a cleansing on the property. So the whole family ends up working out there where the corners of our property are and bringing containers of salt there. Sister-in-law warns us that we might feel weird that night as they do the cleansing. That night I get really sick as well. I sleep poorly, have hot flushes and nightmares, and when I wake up in the morning, I suddenly feel lighter and emptier than I've ever felt before. I also no longer from that point on felt or hallucinated ever again. I spent the entire morning trying to wrap my head around the idea that my brain was apparently haunted or something. We later heard from the psychic and my sister-in-law that our property became a place of solace for spirits from the asylum apparently, and they helped the spirits move on to heal. Later, my sister-in-law came and found me. She told me that the spirits I played with as a kid wanted me to know that they'd apparently come back one day to say goodbye properly. She also told me that my biological maternal grandma was watching over me, but she also tried to kidnap me when she was alive, so I mostly ignored that part. But the weird thing is that, like I said, I'd never told any of this to anyone. It was really nice to know, though, that the people that I played with were actually real, that they came here to feel safe, that they cared about me as much as I adored them as a kid. Also, I now have the best wild story to tell at parties, I suppose. No one can beat, yeah, my brain was haunted for a bit. I don't believe in ghosts, and if I saw someone that I don't know and trust, like on TV for example, telling a ghost story, then I always struggle to believe them. That being said, I had an experience when I was around 10 years old that I'd like to share with you guys. This was in approximately 2003. So my friend and I were walking to football training. I live in a quiet countryside town in Scotland. To get to the football training, we would walk past the tennis courts as it saved a lot of time. The tennis courts are located at the bottom of a wide open grassy area, and next to the tennis courts is a slope section of ground that runs the length of the court. I think it's meant to be the stand where people can sit or stand and watch. It was sort of like a grassy pyramid that's been stretched out in length. There's a path that leads down to the stand and it just stops. On the far side of the stand is a small wooded area. We were on the path walking down to the tennis courts. It was broad daylight. No one was around. The wooded area briefly falls out of view as the path is on the slight decline. We walk up the hill of the stand onto the main body of it, and there's a woman standing at the tree line. She stood there with her hands clasped in front of her, looking directly at us. My friend and I are walking toward her. She stood between a fence and a small stream that's guarded by a waist-height fence. We walked the length of the court, now less than 10 meters from her. She hasn't moved. She's just continued to stand and stare. We turn at the bottom of the court now with our back to her. We haven't said a word, but we looked at each other and we just ran. The woman was grey in appearance, but wasn't transparent or anything. She looked like a real person, but she was sort of uniform color, washed out looking, clothes included. It's a bit hard to describe. But she didn't move once, and I don't mean that she just stood still. She didn't move at all. She was three-dimensional for sure, but it was like she was a cutout that had been placed there almost. That's how still she was. My first thought too wasn't that it was actually a ghost. It was only afterward did we realize that might have actually just happened. There is nowhere that this woman could have come from, mind you. There are 2-meter fences blocking everywhere apart from the far side entrance to the tennis court and the approach that we used to get there. The far side entrance line of sight is never broken either. The stand only obscures a part of the wooded section for a moment, but when we looked back, she was just simply not there. We must have broken line of sight for, at the most, 5 to 10 seconds. And then, there she was again. The village that I lived in is small, and I've never seen this person before, and I've never seen her since. For a good 10 years, too, that area would always terrify me at night. I would hug the fence until I had to turn my back to the area that we saw her, at which point I would always run. It didn't matter how muddy the grass was either. It was always genuinely too frightening to care about the condition of my shoes or anything like that. And I really just don't know how to explain this. I tell people that I don't believe in ghosts if they ask, but I always offer this story as a consolation, I guess. Looking back on it, I wish that I would have spent more time looking at her, as it was happening despite not realizing what I was potentially looking at. The unbroken eye contact was really unsettling though. It made it difficult to look at her, I guess. That friend and I, we don't really speak anymore. We haven't for around 15 years, but I actually bumped into him in town about 4 years ago. And the first question that I asked him once the greetings were over and done with was, "You remember when we saw that ghost?" And he said, "Yeah, I do, mate." So my childhood home was almost undeniably haunted, but not in the scary Hollywood trope style, but more just other people or things sharing our living space and actually being quite helpful. Stuff such as when we were looking for a toy or a certain piece of clothing, we would hear a noise and then find what we were looking for in that direction. My mum was big into spirituality and duality, and we were always taught to be respectful of the unknown and it wouldn't bother us. However, there was one area in that house that just felt off for some reason. The kitchen was black and white alternating tile apart from the bottom left corner where, for some reason, 3 black tiles had been placed next to each other, and for some reason anybody that stepped on these tiles immediately experienced nausea and loss of balance. So much so that my dad installed a grab rail by the door. Now, one of my earliest memories was of being around 6 and following mum around the kitchen, just generally being an annoying kid. I remember vividly fiddling with her Rubik's Cube at that age. I couldn't solve it, and so I used it more like a fidget toy, I guess. But I remember vividly walking over these tiles, losing my balance, and dropping the cube, but whether it was the sound of me falling or some other reason, I never heard the cube hit the floor, and no matter how much we looked, we could just never find it. My kid brother at the time was 3 years younger than me, and says that he saw the cube go into the floor. I'm guessing my mum just wrote this off as a child's imagination at the time. He doesn't remember this now, by the way. But cut to today, 24 years later, and after 12 or 13 years of renting this house out, my mum has made the tough decision to sell the property to help pay for my grandparents' care home and medical fees. Both have quite severe Alzheimer's and dementia, and my nan is currently receiving palliative care for bowel cancer as well. Myself and my brother were generally touching up some paintwork and tidying the living room up when we heard a plastic clunk from the kitchen. When we walked in, there was a plastic Rubik's Cube sitting right in the middle of these 3 black tiles. Mind you, it wasn't dusty or dirty as if it had been there for ages. It was clean and freezing cold to the touch, covered in what I can only guess was condensation. My brother doesn't remember this incident, but I found my mum in an upstairs bedroom and she is adamant that we're playing some sort of trick or prank on her. Then, all of a sudden, a really horrid feeling started coming over me. Like the feeling you get when you know that you've done something wrong or messed up in a really big way, and somehow the situation seems irreparable, if that makes sense. Just a really foreboding feeling. I'm currently sat in my car sharing this with you guys, and I'm just generally freaked, which isn't something that usually happens to me. Every time I so much as glance at the house now, I get a really sickly feeling in my stomach. I'm just wondering too if anybody has had any experience with anything similar, or if you have any advice. This happened about a month ago. For a bit of background, me, my cousin, and my brother took classes over the summer at a local college. Me and my cousin, we took a biology class, while my brother took a pre-calculus class. My brother's class ends later than our class, giving us about a 2-hour window, where we would sit around the college to wait for him. The drive back and forth is about an hour, so we always wait to conserve gas. During the encounter, we were waiting for him at the cafeteria, passing the time. After a while, this woman in a wheelchair shows up in front of some vending machines a couple of feet in front of us. I paid it no mind, but she sat in front of that vending machine for a good 10 to 15 minutes and started to play loud music. It startled me, and so I looked up at her. She then looked at us and asked, "Do any of you boys have 10 cents that I can use for the vending machine?" I had 2 $5 bills in my pocket in case I needed some food, so I gave her a 5 and I got handed back my change. Then she asked for another favor. This time it was to bring her to a parking lot near the football stadium where her ride would be waiting. She said that she had never been there and she needed some guidance. I figured that there was no harm in helping her, so I took the handles, but she immediately stopped me and asked for my cousin instead. I was being pretty oblivious during this entire encounter, so I didn't even realize how strange that request was, and didn't notice any of the strange things that she did until later. I also want to clarify that she was able to move on her own just fine, so the request for her to push at all was a bit strange too. And as my cousin was pushing her, she kept looking back at me and giving an uncanny smile, like it was meant to be a friendly smile, but it came off more like she had some sort of malicious intent. In any case, after we arrived, she looks at us and asks, "Could you stay with me until my ride comes?" Still giving us a smile. We reluctantly agreed. You know, once I had to go back and forth from here in the other parking lot, it was so annoying, she recalls as we wait. Me and my cousin shuffled at this because we found this extremely unsettling. This was because it meant that she had lied to us about not knowing where she was going. Even stranger, she tells me about how she loves to smash glass bottles to tame her anger, like the glass bottles that she had in her hands at that moment. I hadn't caught on to the strangeness just yet, but my cousin was really unnerved. He was trying to discreetly point out that no cameras were around, and that not many people were around, but I didn't catch much of it. At some points while we were waiting, Also, this one car would keep circling the parking lot. We asked if it was her ride, but she told us that her ride was a van apparently. At that time, our ride came, so we just apologized and left. Now, we've told many other people about this story, and they all agree that she was acting pretty strange. Later, I realized how it seemed like she was trying hard to be friendly, how anxious she seemed, and how many of the things that she said just didn't match up and seemed off as well. The main thing, though, that fueled me seeing this as odd was the fact that according to my cousin and his sibling, me and my brother's other cousin, there was an email sent out warning people about a potential human trafficking scheme caught on campus. I couldn't confirm the validity of it because me and my brother aren't actually enrolled into the school and therefore don't get messages about anything going on around campus, and my cousin has been known to play stupid jokes like that. Nevertheless, it's caused me to re-look at what happened through that lens. What do you all think? Do you think that I'm just being paranoid, or did she actually have bad intentions? Also, I should mention too that the email about the potential human trafficking ring had described someone who looked eerily similar to that woman that we walked to that location, being the very front man of that operation. Last May, I moved into an old 6-bedroom house in a neighborhood of Mexico City. The house has been shared among a group of friends, colleagues for a couple of years. It's a bit of a revolving door as far as the tenants and roommates go. Several of these people have shared creepy stories about the house. Most of the stories lacked any meaningful detail, I guess you could say, like the window rattled or something like that. I didn't take anyone seriously is what I'm getting at. I thought that they were all just paranoid. That is, until last Friday night. It seems somewhat worth noting that most of these stories happen on or adjacent to our back patio. No idea why. On Friday night, myself, one roommate, Diego, and his girlfriend were all sitting at a table on the patio talking. It was already after dark, so we had the patio light turned on. Our sliding glass patio door was open. At roughly 8:15 p.m., someone turned off the patio light on us and slammed the sliding glass door shut. For context, the patio light switch is located inside the house, so we couldn't see who could have flipped the switch like that. Diego commented, "That was rude." It was abrupt, but not that strange, I guess. Our other roommates, Armando and Carly, live upstairs and are sometimes sensitive about sound and whatnot. I assume that maybe that they had heard us and got annoyed, or maybe they didn't hear us and simply thought that we left the light on and the door open when we left. I stood up, went inside, turned the light back on, and this time when I turned to the patio, I slid the glass door closed. The next afternoon, I talked to Armando and he said that he and Carly, their boyfriend and girlfriend, had left the house at around 7:30 p.m. on the Friday to visit the mall and see a baseball game. In other words, they were not home when the lights shuttered and the door closed. I was surprised by that, I must admit. Anyway, that same Saturday afternoon at the same patio table that we were sitting the evening before, Diego and 3 friends were having a beer. There was one empty chair at the table, when suddenly the empty chair, or someone sitting in the empty chair, whistled at everyone. Everyone paused and looked at each other. On Monday, yesterday, I ran into Beto, a friend of the company who used to live in that house. I told him about the weekend and he said, "Wait until you see the girl." This was the second, possibly third time that I'd heard of a little girl in the house. Another instance was by the manager of our company, Yolo, who also told me that she saw a little girl in the house as well. This really should be impossible though, as almost no one here has children, and none of the parents that we know have ever brought their kids to the house. Now, I understand that these are all fairly minor instances, I guess, and maybe they could be explained away. Maybe one or more of our friends are tricksters, who knows. But it's really starting to feel like that is not the case. Some other slightly off occurrences too are that someone randomly threw straws out the window at our friends while they sat on the patio, but nobody was home. Julian saw someone move inside Diego's bedroom through the window when Diego wasn't even home. Armando heard voices directly outside of his bedroom door, as if someone was in the hall, when nobody was home. This particular case is the only one where we thought that the voices may have just carried from perhaps outside because the house is big and kind of echoey. And there are other small things that have happened too, but the reason why I share this is because I'm wondering, is there any way to research this? Is there any way to confirm the presence of this little girl or anyone else in this house? I know very little about this kind of thing, and as I mentioned, I've always been a bit of a skeptic. But I must admit that my curiosity, it's getting the better of me now. When I was in basic training for the army, I was in a barracks that I honestly believed was haunted. The main experience that I had that makes me believe this was what happened one night while I was on fire guard. For context, for fire guard, at least when I did basic, there would be one person up at a time. They would have an hour shift, then they would wake up the next person, and so on and so forth. Some of the other people were saying that they had paranormal experiences too at this time, where they had seen, heard lockers being slammed shut when nobody was awake, and they heard clothes hangers moving in closed lockers as well. They would also say that they felt like they were being watched. I hadn't seen anything myself, so I just brushed it off, at least until this one night. So I was on fire guard from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. I was just doing what I needed to do and cleaning. All of a sudden, though, I hear a locker slam shut. I was in the bathroom area at the time. I walked out to see what was going on. I assumed someone was awake, but nobody was. I go back to the bathroom area and finish my work. I then go back to the desk that is towards the entrance of the barracks. As I'm sitting there, I feel like I'm being watched. I try to ignore it when suddenly I hear what sounds like clothes hangers moving in one of the lockers that were beside me. Nobody was there, mind you. I couldn't get back to sleep when my shift was over after that, and when everybody was awake the next morning, they all said that they had heard a locker slam too, and that each of them were in their bunks. Two or three times a year, we vacation in a cabin in the wilderness. Me, my wife, and our 3 young children and 2 dogs. I'm no stranger to the wild and have made a lot of multiple day and week solo trips in national parks and even in the Arctic Circle. Yesterday, too, I went for a 10-mile solo hike, and at the farthest point, after 2 hours, I heard my children arguing, playing, crying, laughing, and calling me from the forest. I was totally alone, and my first instinct was to run through the thick brush and trees where the sound was coming from, but then I realized that there's no way that it could be my kids, and I should just walk on and try to ignore it. I decided to walk back to the cabin in the end. The whole family was there, and they told me that they had never left. Now, I know how my children sound, and I swear that it was them. Later, I realized the combination of all the sounds, laughing, crying, playing, etc., made no sense. So, what was this? What did I actually hear? This past spring, my husband and I went to Acadia National Park in Maine. There are tons of cabins to rent surrounding the historic town. We rented a small cabin and had our dog with us. We had been there 2 days with no issues. I had found a private side road a few hundred feet from the cabin that led to some newer, nice houses. I even saw a woman putting her elementary-age children in her Subaru. In other words, I felt perfectly fine on that quarter-mile track. I also chose to walk my dog down that road because the cabin was along a highway and it backed up against thick woods. Now, the first 2 days I walked my dog down that road, I didn't have any issues. The third day, however, I was walking in the morning and, I don't know, I just got a really weird feeling. I felt like I needed to turn back, so in the end I did. My dog at that moment started to whine in a way that I'd never heard her whine before, nor since then. She looked into the woods while yipping, so I decided to book it back to the cabin. There were 2 dirt footpaths that led to this road. I only took the one near the cabin and not the other one near the barn on the property that we were staying at. I get back to the cabin eventually and I let my husband know what happened, and he got this look on his face. He then told me that the night before, he had walked our dog towards the barn nearby and taken the other footpath. On the side by the trees, he saw what looked like animal skulls, 2 empty liquor bottles, candles, and other items arranged in a deliberate way on a table in the woods. He also got a terrible feeling and he retreated too. My husband is in the military and has been to war and has seen some stuff, so he really doesn't scare easily, but this really creeped him out. It further freaked us out too because I realized that we got the bad feeling near that barn. Even my dog was on edge after that, and so was I. Needless to say, I was pretty happy that we were on our way shortly thereafter. It also turned out that that was the night of a full moon, so we hypothesized that it was possibly set up for perhaps a ritual or as an altar, maybe for a cult. I've been thinking about this for years, and to be honest, I'm still baffled. So when I was a child, maybe 11, I lived near the river in Pulaski County on very private land. It was one road, no walkthroughs, fenced off. Behind our property was a river and we could walk to it, but anyone trying to access the property would have to boat or swim in, stumble through the woods, stumble through a large garden that we had, and a larger yard with huge floodlights that were motion sensing. In front of the house was more dense woods and our private road, one way in, one way out, more porch lights, and at the end of that road was a steel gate. So I was maybe 9 or 10 and I wanted to catch fireflies that evening. My mum said okay, gave me a mason jar, and I went to leave and told my mum that I was turning off the front porch light to see them better. She said that that was okay, but not to go to the tree line. So I was out there for maybe 6 or 7 fireflies worth when I started to see something odd. There was a strange light hanging in between some trees. It didn't move, didn't turn, shake, rotate, or anything. I stared at it for a while, fascinated and scared, but trying to puzzle out what it was. It looked to be a ball and not a beam, and was definitely well defined. I was starting to get past my fascination, and I began to get a bit scared. Then another appeared further in the trees, maybe 5 feet further back. They were literally just hanging there in the air, single balls of light, clearly defined. I decided that enough was enough and I ran to the house. My parents said that I was hysterical enough to warrant a rifle search of the property, and my mum called the police, who came out. In the end though, nobody found anything. No evidence of a fire, lanterns hung in the trees, or a joke, nothing. I already knew that it was neither, but I hoped someone would figure it out in the end. But I was in deep trouble with my dad, who told me that I was making up nonsense, and I got the belt that evening and was put on a diet of stacking wood for the winter that my dad was splitting, housework, etc. That was obviously no fun, but the reason why I'm sharing this is, does anyone have any idea of what this could have been? My siblings and I seem to have all had experiences with the same thing. Well, my sister and I have only caught a glimpse, but My brothers have gotten a good look many times. The spirit has a stereotypical horror movie look, I guess you could say. It appears as a pale woman, average height, thin, with long dark hair down to at least her waist. Her hair is dirty, oily, down to the ends, so it almost looks wet. She wears a white dress or gown, also very dirty and yellowed. Her feet are dirty too, and she seems to always appear barefoot. Her skin is sickly white and really veiny. I only saw her once and got the impression that she was ill, like physically deceased or whatever. My brother is the only one of us who's seen her face. He says anytime that he's seen her, she's looking right at him, usually standing over him when he's laying down or looming behind him, smiling excessively like she means to taunt him. He woke up to see her standing beside his bed most nights for a year or maybe even more than that. He says that she made him too scared to move, that she was smiling but looked like she hated him. I think he said that she whispered something to that effect to him before too. He even saw her in the backseat of his car once and almost crashed. I've only seen her once in a dream. In the dream, I'm standing in the bedroom. The three of us had to share in the small apartment that we moved into right after our parents divorced. It's dark in the room, but I can see the lamp in the living room is on, so I walk to it. Standing in the living room, I see that the light is on in the kitchen. The kitchen had a bar over the countertop and a row of cabinets drilled into the ceiling, so they made a long, narrow window. The woman was suspended in the air, laying flat like on a bed. The first thing that I saw was her oily hair dangling. Then I noticed the backs of her arms and hands. Her dress was hanging from her, the backs of her calves and the dirty black heels of her feet. She was high enough off the ground that the upper cabinets blocked everything else. The dream had an uncomfortable feeling though, like I had wandered in and was seeing something that I wasn't supposed to. I remember being afraid of her and wanting to leave before she noticed me. Then I woke up and that was it. My brother and I were swapping ghost stories a few years later though, and I told him about it. He'd never mentioned his experiences with the woman to me before that, and spilled it all after. I asked why he'd never brought her up, and he said that seeing her made him feel crazy. He felt relieved, in fact, when he heard that I had seen her too. We then called my sister up and asked if she had ever seen anything in many places that we lived in as kids, making a point not to share what we had talked about. She eventually told us that she'd seen the dark silhouette of a woman with long hair in a light-colored dress one night watching her from the hallway of the apartment in my dream, the divorce apartment. She and my brother were both awake for their experiences. My sister experienced sleep paralysis too for the first time in the divorce apartment. She never saw anything when this happened, just felt something malevolent in the room with her. Her sleep paralysis continued on to my grandmother's apartment, who they moved in with after I got married and moved away. That's where, and around the time that my brother started to see her. She tormented him for a long time as well. I didn't have my dream until some years after she stopped, and he hasn't seen her since. But I think about this a lot and wonder sometimes about what exactly she is, how long she followed us around, why she was so bold and aggressive with my brother but not my sister and I, and also why she stopped. For my brother's sake, though, I'm glad that she did. I used to live with my now ex-partner in a 2-bedroom flat here in the UK. It was a strange layout. You entered a sort of communal door, and right in front of you was your own door to then enter your flat. After that, you had around 12 steps up to the landing. On this floor was a bedroom, bathroom, and the main bedroom. To get to your kitchen and living room, which was all one room, you then had to go up to another set of around 10 steps. Now, as mentioned, I lived here with my partner at the time around 13 years ago. It was a cheap rental and all we could afford at the time. Nothing seemed off in the beginning, but weeks into living there, messed up things started to happen. And yes, we did move because of it as well. The first things to happen were passed off as explainable, I guess. Things like electrical issues, the kettles turning on and off by itself, lights being on when you knew for certain that you'd turn them off. However, around 1 month into living there, it turned into sounds and one vision from a close friend. My ex and I still talk about it to this day now and again. But I had 9 of my favorite records framed in rows of 3 and hung onto the living room wall. As they were all collectibles, I ensured that they were placed firmly to nails that I had drilled in the wall. One day I was lying on the sofa and the next minute, one of the records flew across the living room floor. I jumped and picked it up, expecting to see that the ridge was broken and it simply dropped. But it didn't. Not only that too, but it didn't drop directly below where you would expect it to. But it was now at the other side of the living room. I tried to be rational, maybe out of fear I guess, and didn't automatically jump to assuming that it was a ghost, so I passed it off. Looking back now, this ghost liked to throw things. After this, though, a few days passed. My partner and I were standing in the open kitchen chatting and putting shopping away. The next minute, very clearly, footsteps came running up the stairs. Fast footsteps that sounded like they were going to barge in and attack us or tell us seriously important news or something. This all happened in seconds, so we really didn't have time to do anything apart from stand there and wait to see who it was. Maybe an intruder? A friend or a drunk person? But no one had a key to our place, apart from the 2 of us and the landlord. But in the end, nobody appeared. We both looked at each other in disbelief, and I went to the stairs and all our windows were closed. Our flat door was locked from the inside. This, though, was the start of me either thinking that we were both going crazy or spirits were real. After that, my partner and I both sat down to talk about what the heck just happened. She stupidly decided to name the ghost. She named it Biddy. I remember telling her to stop it as I was freaked out and trying to stay level-headed. She laughed at me and said aloud something along the lines of, "All right, Biddy, cut it out, you weirdo," and scoffed. I tutted and went to bed in a foul mood as the event had really creeped me out, as I couldn't explain what the heck just happened. For the next few weeks, things were really quiet though. I started to relax again by telling myself that maybe the flat next to us had the same creaky step and the walls let in a sound. We decided that weekend to have a friend come to stay overnight and have a movie night. That friend's name was C, and this is when things really heated up. I should reference at this point that my partner and I were in a same-sex relationship. We're both female and the mutual friend that we had over is also female. We watched Spice World, 90s kids and all that, and went to bed. C stayed in the spare room, which was on the same level as our bedroom. My partner and I were settling down in bed when C BBM'd me, instant message like WhatsApp, around 20 minutes later, and asked if we were okay and why one of us were pacing back and forth in the bathroom. Now, from the spare bedroom, if you looked out the window, you would be able to see the translucent bathroom window. I messaged back saying that nobody was in the bathroom. The next minute, C came running into our room crying and shouting that there's somebody in there. I ran out and kicked open the bathroom door, which was already half open. But when I did, nobody was there. I checked upstairs, the windows, and to ensure our front door was locked. Everything was really as it should be. I didn't know what to do, so again I tried to be rational and calm her, saying that maybe it was just a shadow from outside or something. The 3 of us had a cigarette and sat up in our bed talking about what she had seen and discussed the other strange happenings in the flat. The more we talked too, the more I knew that this just wasn't normal. My partner said, "Get lost to Biddy, you're not wanted here." I told her once more to stop it. I didn't like naming it. I think making a joke out of it relaxed her, I guess. I mean, what else do normal day-to-day people do in a situation like this anyway? The next morning came and we said goodbye to C and that we would catch up with her the following weekend. There were days in that flat in hindsight which were sunny and bright, and other days that something just always felt off, like a heavy feeling in the air that's hard to describe. Some time had passed though, I can't be sure how long exactly, but I'd assume another couple of weeks. Not much happened, but we had another friend from Scotland come to stay with us for the weekend. I remember asking my partner should we tell her about the recent events, and she said no, it would only freak her out and she wouldn't stay. Plus, really, we had no solid evidence that we had a ghost. I agreed that it was probably a good idea to just keep it quiet. I didn't like to think about it more than I needed to anyway. And this friend's name was N. That weekend, my partner, N, and I ordered Chinese food and had a couple of drinks. Our friend C also decided to join us, but I had texted her previously saying not to mention Biddy. She told me that she wouldn't, and right enough, she never mentioned the name again. But as we were all eating our food and chatting, I totally forgot that I didn't actually hoover the back bedroom where C and N were going to share the bed for the night. Everyone told me not to worry, but I felt like I needed to give it a quick hoover anyway and tidy it up before they used it. I told them to give me 10 minutes and I'd be back with them. I went into the spare room to lift the hoover when I swear to you that my senses just told me that something was off. It was as if the room turned quieter, then almost like silence itself. I stood still listening to my surroundings when I heard what I can only describe as a sort of gurgling sound, like the noise that you'd hear when someone was choking on a lot of water. It was coming directly from behind me as if it were right up behind my back. And man, as I share this, boy do I get goosebumps on my arms. I was too afraid to move, wanting to run out of the room but physically unable to. I must have stood there with this gurgling in my ears for around 30 seconds, which honestly seemed like a lifetime, before I had the courage to turn around. I turned around and there was nothing there, but a wisp of cool air passed through me. My heart felt like it was going to fall out of my chest. It was beating that loudly. I ran up the stairs to where everybody was, and my partner could tell by my face that something had happened. She put a cigarette out, grabbed my arm, and brought me down into our bedroom. She asked if I was okay, and I told her what had just happened. Now, although she was only 5'3", she was fierce. She marched into the spare bedroom, and she just cursed Biddy out loud. I cannot remember the exact names that she called her, but it wasn't nice. I told her to tell our friends that I wasn't feeling well and that I was going to bed early. I just needed to be alone, and believe it or not, sitting with company sounded worse than being afraid by myself. So I stayed in bed and started to Google search other properties where we could maybe afford to rent. I didn't tell my partner at the time. I mean, what if she thought that I was just being ridiculous? But knowing that there were other places that we could afford really reassured me. My partner came to bed that night as C and N shared the back room. My partner asked if I was okay, and I muttered that I was, and we all went to sleep. The rest of the night and morning was, well, pretty uneventful. But another few weeks went on, and again things were semi-quiet and tolerable. I seemed to cope with minor things happening like lights and that kettle switching on and off by itself all the time. Even during these times, I found myself making stupid comments about how Biddy just loved a good cup of tea. Looking back, it was as if Biddy controlled us almost. She told us when it was okay to laugh, and she told us when she was mad and didn't want her there. But as this story comes to an end, I'll tell you the final happening, which this was the moment that made us pack up and leave. So my partner and I got into bed like most other nights, lay chatting on our phones for a bit, and eventually we went to sleep. Beside our dresser was my acoustic guitar, which sat tilted back in its guitar stand, with the clip across the neck of the guitar itself to hold it in place. The only way to get the guitar out is to release that clip too. During the night, though, we were awoken to the crashing sound of my acoustic guitar when it hit the other side of the bedroom wall. As we both jumped up, there it was, lying with the hum of the strings. It bounced off the ground. I immediately started shaking and crying as my partner switched the lights on. The clip from the guitar stand was open, and I remember saying, "I don't want to stay here anymore. I don't want to be here anymore," as I cried. My partner told me that she felt the same way and reassured me that we would move as soon as we could. I couldn't be in that house anymore, though. This thing, whatever it was aggressive, and it was obvious that it did not want us there. It was around 2 a.m. at that time, and we called C to ask if we could come and stay with her, to which she said of course. The next morning, my partner and I started looking for a new place to live, and we contacted our landlord saying that we unexpectedly needed to terminate our tenancy. And at this point, we didn't even care about losing our deposit. We left 2 weeks after contacting our landlord. During the 2 weeks, we stayed with C, only returning to the flat after work together to back up. My partner and I broke up around maybe 2 years after moving to the new place. We remained in contact for a while, but then we grew apart, and I hadn't heard from her in over 8 years, until recently when she reached out to me to ask how I was keeping. The third question she asked me, though, was, do I remember Biddy? And honestly, how could I ever forget Biddy? My roommate and I have been house hunting for some time now. We went to one that just kept calling to us. Every time that we opened our apps, boom, it was right there in our faces. We both felt like something was a little bit off about it though, but eventually we caved and said sure, we'll go and take a look. We get to the house, walk around it, everything seems okay. Garage is boring, paint's peeling, boards outside are rotting, etc. So that was a turn off for us, but we started to go back toward the front of the house and I noticed the back door was wide open. I thought that was a bit odd, as literally anyone could just walk in and squat. It was then too that I got a funny feeling like I was being watched as we walked past it going back to the front of the house. Well, we went inside anyway, just to see it since we were there anyway, and our realtor put in the effort to get us a showing. Everything was okay, it was a cute little place, but that's just it. It was tiny. There was basically no living room. We walk through the place in any case, and we get to the basement stairs. There's no door to them. Just in the back behind the kitchen, there's a small hallway that has the door to the backyard, and at the other end, an open doorway and the stairs down. But instantly, I felt my hair stand up on the back of my neck, and I felt scared to even look down those stairs. My roommate looks at me and said, I feel it too. Maybe I had a look on my face or something, I don't know, but we go down the stairs and I said out loud, just please don't touch me, I'm just here to look. Our realtor looked a bit uncomfortable too. We get to the bottom of the stairs and the oppressive feeling backs off, leaving in its place the feeling of still being watched, but by something that feels almost scared, I would say, almost like a scared kid. We look in the bathroom, the 2 bedrooms, and once I got to the closet in the second room, the I'm scared feeling got stronger. Not like me being scared, but whatever was down there with us was skittish. I walked out of the room and straight across the living room down there. There was a very small area about the size of a small closet, with half an original concrete wall still there, and I instantly felt an overwhelming dread and almost burst into tears. Then I suddenly felt this oppressive feeling come back full force, and while it wasn't audible, it felt like it was screaming at me and it was just telling me to get the heck out of its space. I ran out of that basement so quickly. Once back up the stairs, it was almost a normal feeling too. We went up to the loft in the attic and it actually felt quite comfortable up there, until we turned to go back down the stairs to the main floor. The lights were all off when we went up, so my roommate flipped the switch. They flickered, then all went off except for the one above him. He flipped them back on, but nothing changed. Flipped the switch back again. Flipped the switch back down, but again no change. That one light stayed on no matter what he did. We went back to the main floor living room. The realtor asked us what we thought. My roommate kept looking toward the basement. We finally went back outside and we decided that we were not going to take this house. My roommate and I got in the car and I asked him if he was okay, And he said that apparently he saw and felt something following us everywhere after the basement. And apparently I also said, "Don't worry, I'll find it," when I walked out of the closet and to the concrete wall, but I do not remember saying that. Since then, too, I've been having a nightmare nearly every night, and I'm always trapped in that corner, screaming non-stop. It's dark and I'm in a lot of pain. I don't know what was up with that house, but I think that something terrible happened there. But why am I dreaming as if it's me that is experiencing it? So we just moved into this apartment a week and a half ago. My son will be 6 months old tomorrow, and he's got his own room. We live on the second floor of a 2-story building. We only share our stairs with one other apartment, and there are 2 underneath the 2 of ours, so it is like we have 4 apartments in our little nook, I guess you could say. When you walk up the stairs, the second bedroom of both apartments has a window that you have to walk by to get to our front doors. Not my favorite, but I always make sure it's locked, and the only people walking by should be the person who lives across from us, since they're the only ones with reason to come up the stairs. The way the room is laid out too is when you walk in, you come into a corner. On the wall, coming off the right of the door, there are 2 more. It's his closet and bathroom. I have his crib in between those 2 doors, his changing table, dresser, and all that are in his closet. If you stand by his crib and flip 180, you'll see the wall with the window, and from left to right on that wall I have this rocking chair, a cart with a lamp, books, pictures, all those things that we need for when rocking and whatnot. Then I have a little shatterproof mirror for him on the wall by the floor. Then it's his little play corner with bookshelves and toy shelves, and going around the corner is more shelves and his ball pit. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, on the windowsill I had this baby monitor. We have one of those video monitors that we were gifted for his baby shower, and I like this one because it can't connect to phones or outside technology, only to the device's own screen or control panel that stays in our room. Something you should know too is that we were blessed with a baby who has slept through the night since he was 3 months old. About 4 or 5 nights ago, my son woke up though at exactly midnight screaming and crying, "Mama." He's just had his first word about 2 weeks now, and he uses it like crazy. But I rushed in and shushed him and rocked him back to sleep. When I got back to our bed, I didn't even look at the monitor, I just sort of crashed. In the morning, I went to look at it, and when I woke up, it was facing outside. Like the whole camera unit had somehow turned itself around. It does have a pan back and forth feature, but this was not that. I mean, the whole thing had been shifted around. I rushed in and checked, and everything else was as it should be. My son was fast asleep. I asked my husband if he had moved it, and he looked confused and said that he slept all night. The thing is that I instantly ran in there when I heard him crying and didn't even glance at the monitor, so I don't know if it happened before or after I went in there to check on him. Anyway, fast forward a few days and nothing else is out of the ordinary. Then tonight I see weird stuff on the monitor. I'd say it almost looks like smoke swaying back and forth in front of it. My husband saw it too, so we both went into his room, but there was nothing. So we decided that it was either a bug, a mist from his humidifier, or maybe just a trick of the light or something. Now it's 1 a.m. My son wakes up from a dead sleep screaming again. I say, "I'll go," and I roll out of bed. I shush my son back to sleep and go to set him down, and as I do, I hear 4 consecutive knocks, either on or outside the window, just booms. I don't know how to describe it other than it sounded like someone was knocking on a door, quite loud too. I rush over and pull back the blinds, and absolutely no one is outside. The window is locked and there's nothing there. But I know what I heard. It was clear as day. I waited a few more minutes and came back to bed after checking all the windows and the doors, but I can't help but think that maybe there's something here. Unless there is a logical explanation, I'm very open to that too, but in fact, that's my favorite choice for what's going on here. But does anyone have any advice or insight? Also, I'll say this at the risk of losing some people here, but I'm very sensitive to the paranormal, and I've not had bad or any weird vibes or anything in the house, except for the 2 nights that he woke up screaming. But that could also be mum anxiety, right? Anyway, if you have any idea as to what to do about all this, then please do help me. So I've worked as a correctional officer for a long time now. I've worked at facilities in Texas and in Michigan. The oldest prison that I ever worked at just recently started to close in Michigan, and it got me thinking about all of the paranormal experiences that I've had there, and in the other prisons that I've worked at as well. I'd like to share with all of you some of the more notable paranormal experiences that I've had while working in these prisons. First off, I'd like to say that I never really believed in ghosts, I guess, before I started working as a correctional officer, that is. I started off working in Texas at an intake facility. I worked night shifts, 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first experience that I ever had was working on a lower security housing unit. When finishing a round, I was chatting with my partner and I heard a loud banging sound. It was at like 3 a.m. at this point, so no prisoners should be out of their bunks. I asked my partner if they knew what the banging was, and they, being an older officer, told me bluntly that the unit that we were working in was haunted. They told me the sound was coming from a door of one of the small quiet cells in a hallway not directly visible from the officer station, and about how a prisoner had died in one. The prisoner allegedly died because the officers working there at the time had given them a sack of food when it was lunchtime for prisoners, and the prisoner had actually choked on the food and died. But to be honest, I really didn't believe that the unit was haunted, so I decided to go look at this door. The sound volume increased as I got closer to it, and when I could see it, the door itself was visibly shaking as if someone was pounding on it. But there was nothing that could have been causing the door to shake like that. I was at a loss for words, and later that night I checked the door again and there was a steamed up handprint visible on the glass of the door's window. It was a really weird experience, and it was definitely something that was, unexplainable. Anyway, another experience that I had was at the same facility, but at a different housing unit. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning, and I was sitting inside the officer station watching the cameras and talking to my partner. I look at one of the cameras and clearly see a prisoner sitting at the table in the day room. I turn my head to look at the day room and there's no one sitting at the table that I just saw on the camera. I asked my partner to go and check it out because no one is supposed to be out of bed yet. I roll back the time on the camera to see if I could see where the prisoner might have gone. The prisoner on the camera literally just slowly fades away and vanishes completely. My partner comes back into the officer station and we both watch this video over and over, being just dumbstruck as to what we are seeing. Later on that same night, during one of my rounds, I notice a wet floor sign that got left out. I return it to the porter closet. I get back to the officer station and look back to where the porter closet is, and I'll be damned, I see the same wet floor sign left out. I obviously asked my partner if they were playing a joke on me or something because I just put the sign away, but my partner denies doing anything with it. I go back out and make sure that I put the sign back in the closet and lock the door this time. I get back to the officer station, a wet floor sign right there in the open again. My partner and I are both watching this wet floor sign now, and it starts to tip over on one end really slowly, 2 of its legs off the ground. The sign then slams itself to the ground, and then proceeded to slide back up the hallway and then back to the front of the closet door before ceasing all movement. My partner and I, we refused to come out of the officer station for the rest of the night that night because we were just terrified. One more notable one from Texas as well. I was working in an ad-seg unit, really high security unit for prisoners that get in fights and cause a lot of problems repeatedly. We had a prisoner who was sitting in one of the closed observation cells. These cells are usually used for people who threaten harming themselves. In the summertime, prisoners will sometimes just say that they're suicidal to be put in one of these cells because they're a lot cooler and are near AC vents that the normal housing units don't have. And the prisoners told me that this was what they were doing and that they didn't want to cause any problems. Later on that night, one of my partners and I were watching cameras, and all of a sudden we see a shadow moving across the floor. Eventually it comes to the close observation cell and disappears under the door. This is where it gets a little crazy too. You see, I do a round and check on the close observation cell. The prisoner is pacing in the cell, and I ask them if they're okay, and the prisoner tells me that something just doesn't feel right and that they're hearing voices that aren't there. I try to calm them down, and eventually they do and lay on the bed. Later on, my partner calls for assistance because the prisoner had apparently tried to end it. But the weirdest thing is that apparently they were holding their wrists above their head and allegedly were speaking in tongues. Now, I wasn't there for that one, but with everything else that I'd seen in this place, and also knowing my partner the way that I did, I believe it. So, when I started working at prisons in Michigan, I worked at a prison that was now closing. It was built back in 1877 and is one of the oldest prisons still operating in all of the United States. There were so many small experiences that I'd had there that it would be too long to get into. But like doors would slam, you would hear voices, cold chills, all that stuff. But the first really notable experience that I had was around Christmas time on the third shift. I was working in the oldest unit on the facility. Usually we don't have prisoners there, but we had opened the unit to separate prisoners during the COVID pandemic and whatnot. I didn't have a partner due to how short-staffed we were, so one of the other officers set up a TV for me to keep me entertained because I'd be really far away from all the other units and get bored with no one to talk to. I do rounds for most of the night watching TV in between them, when I suddenly hear a banging noise from a door that leads to a hallway that takes you all the way to an even older unused condemned part of the prison. I open the door, take a look down the hallway, and a cold breeze hits me, and suddenly my arm hairs just are standing all on end. I close the door, thoroughly creeped out. I go and sit down and start watching TV again, but the TV starts flipping through channels rapidly and then stops on static. I have to get moved to a different unit because, to be honest, I was pretty terrified again. But one day on the third shift, my work friend and I were working positions that allowed us to have a lot of free time and no prisoners to watch, when we decided to explore the prison. We explored the tunnels that went underneath the prison, the old barns, the old unstaffed gun towers, and we eventually decided to go look at the old condemned part of the prison from my earlier experience. There was a big metal gate that was about maybe halfway down the hallway that had to be opened by a big skeleton key. We get back to the old condemned part, and my friend tells me about how this part was supposed to be the old segregation. We had to use flashlights to see because this section is so old that it's not powered. But the energy back there, I will never forget. Just being there filled me with a feeling of just utter dread. I asked my friend to head back, and we start to head back down to where the hallway to the gate was, when my friend's flashlight suddenly dies. We make it back to the hallway, barely able to see anything in the almost pitch blackness, when we hear something running after us. So we start running up the hallway too. My friend fumbles with the key as we hear it getting closer. We get the gate open and sprint out of there. And later on, I noticed that my friend had red claw marks all over his arms. It was a crazy and truly scary experience, and it was something that I hope to never, ever experience again. This is something that happened years ago, but the thought of it still keeps me up at night. I was walking through the hills of a provincial park with my dog during the winter, so the sun set much faster than I expected, and before I could get back to my car, it was already dark. Once the sun was gone and all you could see was darkness, I was walking slowly through a field, when out of nowhere I had, to this day, the most gut-wrenching, undeniable feeling that I was being watched. I turned around, and in the distance I saw a figure standing there, darker than the night sky around us. The instant that I saw him, my stomach dropped and my body literally froze. I knew in that moment somehow that he was coming for me. I grabbed my dog's leash and we booked it. I mean, sprinting full speed up and down the hills, around the trees, down embankments. I was running so fast as if my life was dependent on it. And to this day, I'm pretty sure that it was. I make the 30 to 45 minute trip in 10, and all that stands before me in my car is this switchback. You have to sort of go back and forth up if you want to reach the top. So once again, I'm giving it all I got, running up this switchback as fast as I possibly can. And once I reach the top and look back down, who else but this person is chasing me? And he gets up the switchback like how any sane person would. Of course not. He starts sprinting right up the middle of this switchback, heading straight for me. I scream at him to leave me alone, and he doesn't say anything, not a single word, just continues running right at me. I am so lucky that my car was at the top of this hill, because as I ran towards it, just like in the horror movies, I dropped my keys and I was fiddling with them trying to open the door. Just in time too, I get the door open, throw my dog in it, and shut the door behind me, just as this guy reaches us. The best part is that there were no other vehicles parked anywhere around us, but where did this person park? Yeah, right next to me of all places. Now, this guy literally jumps into his truck so quickly, and to this day I've never seen a better example of speeds out of there like a bat out of hell. He guns the engine so hard, black smoke is blasting out of the back as he swerves out of there, leaving skid marks behind him. I sat in the back of my vehicle for hours afterwards, shaking and crying, knowing that I was this close to whatever he had planned for me. And that's why I'm sharing this story, in the hopes that people won't ignore that gut feeling, the little voice in the back of your head that tells you to run. If I didn't that day, I never would have noticed him in time and would have had the heads... If I didn't that day, I never would have noticed him in time and wouldn't have had the head start that I needed to escape. Always trust your gut feelings and intuitions, because it might really be the deciding factor in if this is your final day on Earth or not. This all happened about a decade ago at a travel center in New Mexico. I worked the night shift as a prep cook there, and while there I had a few strange experiences that I'd like to share with you. So, the first was pretty standard. I was chopping onions, and out of the corner of my eye I see a figure walk past me and stop in the corner. When I turned to look, nobody was there, and I felt the base of my spine go ice cold. Now, to clarify, my family has history with paranormal stuff. Had a great-grandma who was a medium. I used to see shadow figures all the time in my childhood home until I was 15 or so, and then started seeing them again when I was in a deep depression with tendencies, much better now, in my early 20s. That chill down my spine always accompanied these experiences though, and I use it as a bit of an indicator that something is near. Anyway, after that first experience, I started to ask around, and this was a common occurrence here. In fact, 3 or 4 people had the exact same thing happen. Busy with the task, a dark figure at the edge of their vision walks by. When they turn to look, it's gone. It would happen again occasionally, but I would just ignore it. The second wasn't a single incident, but something that happened regularly, usually after seeing it in the corner of my eye again. Part of my job as a prep cook was making large batches of soup and chilies for the next day. I'd put these 5-gallon pots on the burners with the meat to start browning, turn to chop the veggies, and when I turned back, all my burners would be off. Fairly innocuous, but it happened too often for it to be an error, and again it was accompanied by a chill in my spine. But the final incident actually happened to someone else, but I was present for it. To explain as well, here is a quick rundown of how our walk-in is laid out. So, the door was in the prep kitchen. Inside the walk-in was a second door that led to our freezer. The freezer had its own light switch that was located in the regular walk-in fridge. So, the line cook goes into the walk-in. I think nothing of it until he comes out a few minutes later wanting to kick my butt. After I calm him down, he tells me that he was in the freezer section when all of a sudden the lights turn out and he starts hearing a man laughing coming from the main walk-in. I let him know that not only was it not me, but I'd been in the kitchen the whole time and nobody else had gone in. He goes white as a sheet at this and didn't want to talk about it anymore. So, those are my experiences at the truck stop. Thankfully, I don't have much contact with the other side now that I'm in a better headspace, but I have a couple of others from my time in New Mexico that I might share at some point in the future. For now, it feels good to get this off my chest, and I just want to say thanks for listening. So first off, just let me say that it doesn't really bother me if you believe me or not. I just want to share this for people who might be interested. That said, I had my second hypno-regression session today to revisit my alien abduction when I was 6. I remember everything. I thought that I had a clear picture last time, but I was wrong. The second session had me face the entire thing without fear, and I remember them taking me, their megaship, their transport hangar, all of the human-looking people, crafts, the bed, the tracker, the box. I remember it all. So, I was 6 years old, and this took place sometime between 2001 and 2002 in Washington State, USA. I remember seeing a blinding, bright white light fill my entire room and illuminate everything in it. Then I remember seeing these two people appear out of nowhere, standing in my room next to my window, and I hear a resounding voice in my head say, "Come with us." Next thing I know, I remember floating up through the roof of my house, seeing the entire city below. The feeling of weightlessness, bliss, confusion, fear, and excitement. I'll never forget it, all at the same time. I remember going into this large white room, the bright lights and small silver orb crafts with small sort of looking fins around the bottom sides lining the wall. Maybe 5 or 6 of them. But at this point, I remember running out of there and going into a hallway, frantically pushing past what I assumed to be other grown-ups. I remember hearing them gasp in surprise as I pushed past them, and that's when I remember running up to this large window. I looked out, trying to get a sense of where I was, and all I saw was space and the earth below me. I remember being scared, running away and into another group of these people where one stood up and said, "Whoa, you're not supposed to be up here." They grabbed me, soothed me with this weird sort of sensation of being under a waterfall of smoke that tingles the entire body as it washes over you. They said that their name was Arik and held me there until 2 smaller people showed up. At this point, I think they did something to me because I couldn't move. I remember being floated or carried back down this hallway and into this large room with a strange brown light that glowed in the whole room. They laid me down into a bed, and that's where this large mantis-like being was there, wearing some kind of a robe or a coat. I know it sounds really weird, but I remember being scared, a bit somehow okay with it, but I had this warm, sort of hazy feeling still. I remember being held down by my hands and wrists, and it hurt a lot. The mantid told me that it was so that I wouldn't run away, but that they'll help take the pain away, and they did. I distinctly remember the pain went away after that. Next, I remember it turned on a bright overhead light in the room, turned my head to the left and put a large sort of cylindrical needle or syringe thing behind my right ear, and then everything just went completely white and fuzzy. They said that it was a tracker, and it was so that they could watch me. They told me that it was all part of the plan so that they could study and preserve humans for the future. They told me that I'm supposed to be a teacher and that my purpose is in the future of this world. Next, I remember being taken by these 2 smaller beings into an adjacent room where they gave me this, small box. When I opened it, it exploded in a fountain of light, and inside the light, I saw screens with pictures of trees, mountains, a river, memories, numbers, letters, people walking, symbols, and all kinds of things. But most of all, it showed me my previous life. And to be honest, I really don't know what to think of this. So, I would really like some help. In this box, this previous life, these beings showed me the house I lived at, how I lost my family of a wife and 2 kids, and how it ultimately led to my all-consuming sorrow and the taking of my own life. If anyone knows a Marcus Peterson who had a wife and 2 kids that were about 10 and 6, give or take a few years, died in a car accident, and Mark took his own life. We lived in a small house on a piece of land surrounded by trees apparently, with a front porch covered by a small roof, a screen door and brown wooden front door. then please do let me know. In any case, after that whole experience, they took me back to this large hangar area. They floated me back down into my room with the bright light, laid me down into my bed, turned around, and I felt them say, "We'll be seeing you again soon." And then they left. And that's pretty much it. So if you have any ideas as to what I should do now, then I would love to hear it. A few weeks ago, me, 23-year-old female, and a friend, 24-year-old female, planned to go to an event together. Since we only had free time after work, we decided to get an Uber so we wouldn't take too long to arrive and could enjoy more. The first half of the ride was really normal, seemed like a normal, polite dude. But as soon as we got to the highway, his attitude changed. He seemed a lot more irritated. Me and my friend didn't pay much attention though and kept chatting between us. Our attention was drawn when he started shouting with another driver. He turned to us and said that he was going to pull over. I tried objecting, but he ignored and pulled over anyway. He reached out for the glove compartment and pulled a gun out. Important to note that guns are illegal in my country too. We were just watching this unfold with holded breath, and when the other guy drove away, we let out a sigh of relief, but then we were still stuck in the car with this crazy guy with a gun. After that, he went back to driving and apologized to us, saying that the guy was tailgating him. I let out an, okay, I got it. He kept talking. Man, that guy's lucky that you two girls are here, or else I would have followed him and shot him in the face, sleazy idiot. I look over to my friend. She is in shock and paralyzed. I'm in shock too, but trying to keep my cool because the last thing that I want is to get this guy annoyed at us. I mean, if he was willing to shoot that guy for tailgating, I didn't want to know what he would do to us if I said the wrong thing. No, it's okay, I understand, I say, trying to appease him. These guys need to be taught a lesson, he continued while I just agreed with my head. I did that before, you know. You just trap the guy in an empty street and when he leaves the car, bang! Did he just admit to murder? Was the only thing running through my mind. But somehow I managed to keep calm and just agreed with him the rest of the way. He did deliver us to the right place with no more incidences. I waited a few weeks to report this since he had my home address and wouldn't be hard to figure out who reported him. Thankfully, nobody showed up at my home with a gun, at least until now, and Uber has answered my report saying that they started an investigation. I hope that this guy doesn't do this to anyone else because it was a truly terrifying experience, to say the least. This happened a few years back, and though I've experienced other strange phenomena since, this in particular has always stuck in my brain. So I worked as a server at what was portrayed to be a high-class evening restaurant where a reservation was required. The restaurant was inside a pre-Civil War era stone house and located right in the center of a well-known haunted town with a lot of history. It was around 4:50 p.m., 10 minutes before opening. I was the only one on the schedule that night besides for the chef. The dining room had large street-facing windows that had been sealed shut for years with no other opening to the outside. Everything was set up for the night, and all I had left to do was lighting the 15 or so candles that decorated the mantel and the tables. The candles had no trouble sparking up and had steady, consistent flames. Before exiting from the dining room, I took a last remaining glimpse to ensure perfection and was very happy with my work. I then left for the kitchen to quickly check in with the chef before opening. I made my way back to the dining room after no more than maybe a minute, and when I say that I was absolutely gobstruck, I'm not kidding, because every single candle had been blown out. There was still smoke lingering from all 15 candles as well, and my mind just cannot come up with an explanation, a logical one anyway, for this. I mean, there was no possible entrance in the dining room besides the front door, which had been firmly locked. The chef and I were the only two people there, and he wouldn't have been able to leave the kitchen without me noticing, since there's only one pathway between the two rooms. There were no fans or open doors, and as stated before, all the windows were sealed shut. I remember the air feeling abnormally still as well, and getting an overwhelming sense of discomfort and dread upon re-entrance, as if I was being, watched. Up until this day, I still haven't been able to find any solid reasoning behind the occurrence and truly believe that something strange made itself known that night. Around a year ago, my neighbours 3 doors down the street moved to a nearby town and a new family moved in. The new tenants, we'll say, are a man in his late 40s, whose name I actually don't know, and a girl who is about 13 and is in the same school year as my brother. Apparently, he has numerous other kids from separate relationships, but the girl is the only one who lives with him. I'll quickly talk about the house and the area too, because it's probably worth knowing. My area is a very safe middle-class neighbourhood. The same can be said for the house that this bloke bought. But I don't know what he's done to it, but he's built a deck which isn't coloured or anything and just looks like it's made out of old wood, and the front door is a complete separate colour to the rest of the house too. Essentially, it sticks out like a sore thumb among all the other houses. Anyway, now I'd like to go through the events that me and my family have learned about or experienced with this guy before today. Everything I mention did not happen prior to his moving in. So not long after he moved in, a pair of trainers appeared on the power lines directly outside of his house. I live in a really safe area, but according to my uncle, who works for BT and used to be an electrician for another company prior to that, they can be signs of illegal stuff like drug dealings or gangs. Apparently workers who come in to remove them get threatened by whoever puts them there. Every few nights at about 1 a.m. to 1:30 a.m., a car always drives up, stops outside of his house, waits for a few minutes, and drives off. I stay up quite late normally, and I've caught them in the act a few times now. It's the same car every time, a blacked out BMW. The driver and another passenger run out of the car with the engine running. They sprint to the man's door, and then one of them returns and drives off. Of the 4 or 5 times I've seen it, myself, it has been a man and a woman, with the man running back to the car at the end. Similarly to the last one, my family go out for walks regularly, and there's often numerous women sitting on his front step in the evenings when they go out for walks. They don't speak much to each other, and if they do, it isn't in English. This led us to believe that they might be immigrants, but that's up for speculation. On numerous occasions, my next-door neighbours, an older woman in her mid-50s, who I'll call S, her daughter A, and A's boyfriend D, walk A's dog around the nearby streets. Usually the dog walkers are S or D, and one day a few months ago, D was walking their dog when they heard screams coming from the house. He immediately went back home and called the police. I'm not sure what happened afterwards, but on another day, not long after it, was S walking the dog late at night. As she went past the bloke's house, she saw an unmarked car and a police van outside of his house, almost in a barrier shape around his driveway. I also don't know much about this either, unfortunately, but there's allegedly been a duvet cover hanging out of the bathroom window with stains on it. One of my neighbours, who I'll call Fish and Chip Man, he owns a fish and chip shop, who is the bloke's next door neighbour, speculated that it could be one of 2 things: a drug farm or a torture chamber. Torture chamber seems a bit far-fetched to me, and I don't buy it personally, but drug farm sounds plausible to me, considering the trainer situation too. There was a time around a month ago where my parents were at a nearby guitar festival, which I was performing at. They ran into a very drunk man who said that he lived adjacent to the bloke on the other street parallel to ours. My parents subtly sort of pressured this guy, who apparently had a whole number of stories himself. They were very similar to ours, but he's not affiliated with our street, so it's interesting to know that there's others around him who have noticed the same thing. But it's also very concerning to us for obvious reasons. Now, this is where I want to talk about yesterday's events. This is very hot too, so I'm prepared for half of this to be incorrect to some extent, but there's some things that we know for sure, some things are speculation, and hopefully we'll be able to tell what is what soon. So, I'll start with 2 nights ago. At around midnight, a woman started pounding on the man's door, screaming threats at him in the middle of the night. The man, presumably drunk, started shouting back through a window. Fish and Chip Man opened a window and shouted to the man to shut up because he's disrupting everything. The man shouted back to Fish and Chip Man something about rape allegations, which Fish and Chip Man responded to by saying that he was calling the police. For whatever reason, Fish and Chip Man never called the cops though. However, someone must have anyway, because at around 4 a.m. yesterday morning, he was arrested by the police. Why? I don't know. But his young kid was apparently being relocated to her grandparents or something. According to me, after 3 p.m. and my dad before that, from 4 a.m. to 8 p.m., there have been police vans parked in his driveway all day, at least 4 different officers on standby at all times, and both a marked and unmarked car have been stopped and staring all day. They've apparently been scanning and searching the house all day and only left in the late evening. I managed to watch the moment that the unmarked car arrived. 2 officers left it, took what looked to be an Asian woman in glasses out of the house and into the back seat of the car, and that car never came back. Apparently at about noon, my other next door neighbor, P, went to the officers and nonchalantly started pushing them for information. My dad's the one who's been keeping such a close eye on this, and quite a bit of this information has come from him. So when he saw P go engage in some friendly conversation, he, of course, was right out there in an instant. Afterwards, P took my dad into her house and gave her side. And this is what P thinks she knows. Firstly, the man has already had a criminal record which we were unaware of. There's also a possibility that he's been in jail in the past. The second, more concerning and more likely to be the truth, is that the bloke's father was a major criminal and is also still incarcerated. The most common and most believed theory is that he's a pedophile and also a sex offender. But here's the final point and the most concerning to all of us. He might be out now, and I looked outside at about 11 o'clock last night and realized that his car is missing from his driveway. Before writing this, his car was in the driveway and all the lights in his house were completely off. And this could mean one of 2 things. One, the more likely solution is that he has been released, has returned and has driven off somewhere. I don't know where he could have gone, but given his track record, so to speak, it's probably not good. And 2, he's still in the police station and they've taken the car away. I don't think that this is the case, however, as I feel like we would have heard a flatbed made its way down the quiet street at some point. In any case, if I find out anything more, then I'll definitely share it with you guys. As for me and my family, we're pretty freaked out by all of this, and we hope it's not some sort of a torture chamber like our neighbor theorizes. To start this off, I'd like to say that I don't live in a creepy house. It's old, I admit, but in the charming sort of way. It doesn't feel negative when you walk in. It feels like home, really. Always just home. So you can imagine my absolute shock when I was laying in bed alone this morning watching something watch me back. 4 a.m. this morning, my husband left our bed to go to the bathroom. Our room is decent sized, but from where the bed sits, you can sort of see one of the 2 windows in the room, the other one being covered by blinds and the TV. It being 4 a.m. in the summer, it's a bit light to where you can see outlines and curtains and things. We have no animals, by the way. So I laid in bed waiting for him to return so that we could cuddle when I blinked and suddenly saw movement in the dark. A dark mass in the shape of a head had moved over the top of the covers just enough to where I could make out the fact that it was moving. I froze because I thought that it was my husband at first. Sometimes when he gets up, he'll sit in the chair and put on the headphones and play video games to not wake me up when he can't go to sleep. And I thought that maybe he had just got back in and I just didn't hear the door open, and that's why he was sitting in the dark looking at me like that. So I asked him, "Why are you sitting on the floor?" A few seconds with my heart pounding, no answer, and then I heard the doorknob click, and as soon as my husband walked in, it ducked down and it just disappeared. I screamed, obviously, because, what the heck, right? And had him do a thorough search, but he didn't find any intruder. I still can't explain it, and I'm scared to go into my bedroom alone now. I experienced a lot of stuff, especially as a kid. I've been told that I had an aunt that had passed away in another life that was trying to look out for me, but I've never ever seen what I witnessed this morning. It did not make me feel safe at all. I've only ever spoken to a few close friends about this experience. When I was about 12 years old, me and my 2 younger brothers and my 2 younger cousins were playing outside at night. Our cousins came over to see us, and all of the adults were inside the home. We lived in a small trailer park in Texas at the time, and it was built either on top of or near indigenous land. We played outside a lot at that time, and there was a street light that shone over the part of the road that we were playing on, so it didn't feel like creepy or dangerous or anything. I looked down the road where a white house sat, and next to it was a garage, and next to that was the forest. And there was a lot of forest in this area, in fact. And I noticed something coming out of the forest. I thought it was a wolf for a brief moment, but then I felt my heart sink when I saw its distorted-looking, long, thin limbs, and the uncanny way that it moved brought tears to my eyes almost. It had a long head and a small mouth like a horse, tan in color, and it was extremely thin and had no tail. It was weird looking, and as soon as I saw it, I knew that something was wrong. I grabbed my cousins and told them to look where I was pointing and asked if they could see it too, or if I was crazy. They had a terrified look on their faces and said yes, and I looked over it where I saw the creature, and it got up and started walking on its 2 hind legs, and moved in such a weird way. It began to climb the garage with ease, and this thing had to have been around at least 8 to 10 feet tall while standing on its back legs. I then ordered everyone to run inside. I told the adults what we saw, and obviously they didn't believe us for whatever reason. I assumed that they thought that it was our imaginations. But anyways, I haven't seen these cousins since the encounter due to family issues. I've searched the internet many times trying to find a sighting or a report or an image that resembles this creature, to which I've really had no luck. So now I'm turning to here. If you've seen anything like this, then please let me know. If you know anything about what we saw that night, then please leave a comment below. Or if you've seen something like this, I would love to talk to you. Listening to some stories here, it's reminded me of an event that occurred about a month ago behind my home. For some background, I live in the Bridgewater Triangle, near the Hockomock Swamp. If anyone isn't familiar with the area or strange events that have occurred, it's well worth the deep dive and you should look it up sometime. But to make a very long story short, about 350 years ago, King Philip's War was fought between the colonists and the natives living in the area. The conflict lasted 3 years from 1675 to 1678, killing nearly 5,000 natives and the colonists during that span as well. At the time, many of the deceased were buried in the neighboring swamps and forests with unmarked graves, and over the years the area has been a hotbed for paranormal activity, such as apparitions, thunderbirds, Sasquatch and UFOs, just to name a few. Anyway, on to my story now. So, it was a typical cool summer night when I came home from the gym at around 11:40 p.m. on a weeknight. I jumped out of my car and headed for the back door when I began to hear the sound of drums coming from the direction of the woods. My house is the last on the street, closest to the town river and adjacent to the swamp or deep wooded area. The closest house through the woods is about 8 miles away, and I've never heard them to this point, as I've lived in this home since 2014. So, naturally, I sort of walked towards the tree line to identify the source of the sound. The drums sounded very basic, like a hand drum maybe, and it played in a very methodical, rhythmic, sort of almost tribal beat. But what happened next, I really can't fully explain. You see, as I began to get closer to the woods, staring into the darkness, the volume of the drums began to raise and lower at random. It didn't sound like the drum's volume was being adjusted. Instead, it sounded like the drums were moving. Like whoever was playing the drums was sprinting through the woods at an inhumane rate of speed, causing the drums to sound as close as like 50 yards to as far as about 150 yards away in like mere milliseconds. Only the dim driveway spotlight illuminated behind me as I stood alone in the dark, and in that moment, a feeling of just dread washed over my body, so I began slowly walking backwards, never turning my back to the moving sound that I was still hearing. I stepped through the kitchen door, wondering if I had made the experience up. To this day, I can only guess at what I had heard that night. The rational explanations don't seem to add up, but I've always been fascinated in the paranormal and had not experienced anything definitive, I guess you could say, until I moved to this area. I do plan on sharing some of my other experiences at some point if there's interest, but anyway, this happened and it's something that'll stick with me, I think. So for context, I lived on a ranch in rural South Texas. My house was built in a sort of square shape with 2 living rooms, and all of the bedrooms and hallways connect via bathrooms, so you could walk around the whole house without hitting a dead end. And as a kid, I would sleep in my parents' room, which connected to the back living room or game room. My parents' bed faces the door leading out said room, and one night during a bad thunderstorm, the power went out, and I couldn't sleep, and eventually a flashlight beam appeared on the wall straight across from the doorway, and out of shock, I sort of sat up and stared at it for what I felt like was an eternity. Not knowing where this light was coming from, after maybe 2 or so minutes, I started to see someone sort of stick their hands in front of the beam and started to do hand puppets of a bird and then a dog and then a few more creatures, which I can't explain, but they were at that point that you would make those figures with your fingers. I watched in amazement for a few minutes, but began to realize that both of my parents were laying next to me and we should have been the only ones in the house. My first instinct was that it was someone outside on the back porch doing this through the glass door, but then I noticed that it couldn't have been due to the angle that they would have had to have been next to the door or way along the wall, which was impossible. I woke my mother up to look, but she didn't want to budge and told me to go to sleep. At the same time, the hand puppets became more erratic and were sort of shifting, so to speak, faster and faster, and I started to cry, and my mother woke up and looked at me, and how I was acting, she eventually looked at the doorway, but said that she saw nothing. I looked back in the direction, and it was gone. Now, I know that this is a really strange story, but after this night, every now and then, at night, the flashlight and the puppets would come back, and I tried to show my parents, but they would never wake up and catch it on time. I would just cover my head with the blankets and hold onto my mother's arm for dear life. As an adult, I can still see the memory of it clear as day, but the thing that gets me the most is that the wall that I could see these puppet shows on had some like Coca-Cola collectibles on it, and one of them was glowing in the dark, and then the shadow of the puppets would sort of cross over it. It would go completely black as if it never had any light. It was just as dark as everything else. And when it was over, it was back to normal. There have been plenty more things that have happened on my parents' ranch, and if anyone's interested, I would be willing to tell more of those stories, but this one has always stuck out to me because it was just so weird. So I'm not a big believer in ghosts, but I have had 2 experiences that have kind of shifted my perspective, I guess you could say. One of them was when I lived in Bellingham, WA. My wife and I moved into a house at the end of Virginia Street back in 2016. The house was in decent condition, but certainly older. We had a daughter who was about 5 or 6 at the time and a newborn, and after moving in we noticed a few strange things happening. We never felt threatened by whatever was in that house, and I fully admit that maybe all of these are just some random events brought together by coincidence. But after moving in, my wife wanted to finally get cable TV. Having worked with Comcast before, I have always seen cable as a bit of a waste of money, and I certainly wasn't making a lot too. But she wanted it, so we ended up getting it. A day or two later, I was asleep and having a dream that the TV was really loud in the other room. My wife woke me up and said that somebody was in the house and that they had turned on the TV, so it wasn't a dream. I told her to stay put in the room with the baby and the phone to call the police if she heard a commotion, and I got my pistol, military, LE type background, and I carefully moved towards the living room. It was hard to hear if someone was moving around because the TV was so loud, pretty much full volume, but I tried to pay attention anyway because I knew that I needed to have positive identification before raising the pistol, and the house was dark. After all, waving a gun at shadows is how innocent people get shot. I got to the living room though and didn't find anything, so I kept moving. I didn't turn off the TV because I figured the loud noise would also mask the sound of my movements. Since it was my house, I figured that I had the home court advantage against my intruder. I was very lucid given that I had just been dead asleep, but adrenaline is like that. I ultimately cleared the entire house, and in the end I didn't find anything. The TV had apparently just come on by itself. Stuff happens, I figured, as I turned off the TV and stood in complete silence. Wires get crossed, and the old man across the street may have turned in his TV, and the same remote frequency may have activated our TV. Who knows? I secured my pistol, you have to with kids in the house, and tried to go back to sleep. But a few days later, I picked up my daughter at school. "Dad, I have to tell you something." Great, I thought. My daughter got put in time out again at school for being disruptive. She's always been a bit of a lovable blabbermouth, but what happened? Well, last night my TV came on by itself. Now, I might have normally brushed this off with the same crossed wires, TV remote sort of logic gymnastics, but my daughter's TV was only connected to a PS3, which we used so that she could watch Netflix. It takes 2 separate remotes to turn anything on as well, so this was definitely a bit creepy. Because my security contracting job had me work all over at different times of the day, my wife and I would frequently sleep in different rooms so I didn't wake her up when I went to work. As a nursing mother, she was already getting very little sleep as it was. And after I went to bed one night, I heard running up and down the hallway, just like quick little steps running past my door. I even got up and opened the door to tell my daughter to stop running, and almost simultaneously, my wife opened her door, opposite mine across the hallway, to tell our daughter the same thing. "Are you making all that noise?" "No," I said. "I thought it was Isa." But I could see in our daughter's room, and she was asleep in her bed. She's asleep, though, and she was. Not in the way kids pretend to be asleep so that they don't get yelled at to go to bed. This was the sleep with drool coming out of her mouth and her hair covering her face, just like completely out of it. My wife and I didn't talk about the footsteps that we had both heard running down the hallway, but a few days later, I was in bed again in the spare bedroom, almost asleep, and I heard this terrible noise of what could only be the unmistakable sound of a plastic sippy cup falling onto the linoleum in the kitchen and bouncing around for what seemed like forever. "I've got her this time," I thought, tossing the blankets off so that I could tell our daughter to go back to bed. I grumpily walked to the kitchen and flicked on the light, but when I did, there was nothing. No cup, no explanation for the sound whatsoever. My wife followed. "Hey, what was that noise?" Nothing," I said. I didn't need to freak her out. We both became more aware of a presence in that house. Not evil, I don't think, but just annoying, like they were starting to let us know our time as their house guests had come to an end and it was time to leave sort of vibe. A little while later, days or weeks, I don't really remember the time exactly, but my wife and I were sitting on the couch, and as we watched TV, that cable that I was reluctantly paying for, we heard this sort of slow squeaking sound. We looked around to see where it was coming from, and it took a second for us to notice that it was the door to the linen closet in the hallway being opened because it was opening so slowly. The door had a mirror on the inside, and we slowly watched as the door opened until we sat there, staring at our own reflection. We just sort of sat there, silent, trying to find one impossible explanation for why our house couldn't actually be haunted. very shortly afterward, I got a new position and we were scheduled to move across the country. We had a garage sale and sold whatever items we could to reduce the amount of junk that we would otherwise have to pack or throw away. A few neighbours picked through our stuff, and I eventually got into a conversation with an older gentleman about why we were moving. "Yeah, I remember when this house first got here a few years ago," he said, unsolicited. The house was in good condition, but old. Old cabinets and fixtures, a pink toilet and a bathtub, he said. Something from the late 1970s or early 1980s. Something an old lady like my grandma would live in. Sir," I said, correcting him, "this house certainly wasn't built only a few years ago." "No, that's when it first arrived here. The old house was brought in from somewhere else and put on this lot." If he had told me that some old lady had died in that house, I'm sure that I would have lost my mind. But I certainly wasn't going to ask him. I recently moved into an apartment building all the way up on the top floor. The balcony is at the back of the building. The view is mostly trees, but there's some houses and a street directly behind the apartment building, so I can see that too. Hopefully that makes sense. So, I usually sit out on the balcony at night, just listening to music. At night, the view is just darkness aside from the house porch lights and the road lit up by the street light. Most of the road view is covered by trees, but I can see a good amount of it. There's also no light from my balcony, so at night I just sort of sit there in the dark, aside from the light coming from my phone, that is. I was sitting out there at around 10 p.m. or so, like I usually do, and I noticed movement from the road. When I looked down, I saw someone running down the road, like really fast. From a distance, it looked like this person was running faster than any human should. I was just watching when this person just stopped under a street lamp, under the light. I could tell this person was a man. I also realized that this person was now looking up at me. I got nervous, but I didn't move because I thought that I could just be overthinking and maybe this guy wasn't actually looking at me. I mean, how could he? My phone wasn't on, so I was pretty much sitting in complete darkness. Could he really see me from all the way down there? I just kept sitting there, hoping the guy would leave, but when I saw him waving at me, that freaked me out. Now I knew that he was looking at me. I was too uncomfortable to do anything. I couldn't even go back inside. I just sat there, getting increasingly nervous. My thoughts started running a bit wild. I thought that this guy might find my apartment and try to break in or something. I also thought that he would somehow just sprint forward and climb up the building to get to me or something. But as I kept staring at this guy waving at me, a sudden feeling of dread came over me. That's when I started grabbing my things to go back inside. But then I saw that he stopped waving. He reached both his arms out to the side and started swaying his body side to side, bending his knees as he moved and wiggled his arms around like a weird dance move. At this point, I was incredibly unsettled and just wanted to go back inside, but I was also slightly intrigued in a weird way, and I guess I wanted to see what he might do next. Soon, the feelings of dread and unease took over, and I continued closing up all of my stuff, and I went inside. There was a window in the room next to the balcony, though, where you could see down to the same area, so I peeked outside trying to stay hidden behind the wall. I saw this guy still moving around, side to side, but he soon stopped, and I saw him just start booking it down the road again. I made sure my front door was locked, and I went back to my room, locking the bedroom door as well. My bedroom window looks out the same direction, so I made sure that that guy was gone, and then I closed my curtains. But as I was watching him run down the road, it was like he went behind a pole and just instantly disappeared. I didn't really sleep well that night. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I had. This happened a couple of nights ago, and I haven't seen this guy since then. I've still been sitting out on the balcony, but I've been getting really paranoid when I'm out there at night, so I don't stay out there for as long as I used to. I don't really know what to make of this whole thing. I don't know who that guy was, or maybe what he was, I guess. I get really uncomfortable and paranoid when I think about that night, like I'm back in that moment feeling those exact feelings again. Also, since then, I get occasional waves of dread, like at times throughout the day I get the feeling like I'm just being watched. I hope that this feeling goes away soon, and I'm really hoping that I don't see that guy ever again. I'm of the mindset that everyone should know a little bit about cars. I've always been mechanically inclined too, and I think that may have actually saved me. I was using dating apps a few years ago. Met this guy, he seemed super nice. We talked for a few weeks before I was willing to meet with him. His dad owned a local gun store where I would go to get my Target stuff. I used to be in a women's league for competition shooting. So I had seen this guy around and had a decent impression of him, but wanted to be safe. He invited me to a concert at a local town site. It was a concert that I really wanted to go to as well, and I figured that it would be safe since it was at a well-known place with a lot of security and all that. I let him pick me up because he had talked about mechanics and cars, and he wanted to show me his Mustang. He bragged about how well he kept it running and how he babied it and all that. I was into time trial racing at that time, so I was interested to see what he had done. So he picks me up and we start heading to the event. Right before the exit, he says that his car is acting funny though. I was watching the dash, and if you've been in racing, then you know that our cars and trucks usually have extra accessories and all that. Whether it's aftermarket racks and gauges or switches, there's usually something aftermarket inside the car. There was nothing extra. The car felt like it was shifting correctly. There was no shudder or noise, nothing to indicate any problems. I was like, that's weird, and all I said was we should try and limp it to the concert venue. It's less than a mile away, and it's better than being stuck on the I-15. He agrees and drives us very carefully the last mile. We get to the concert and things were okay-ish, I guess. He kept watching me and buying me drinks. I refused to drink though, so every time he gave me one, I would make up an excuse and go to the bathroom and flush it. He kept making comments about how well I was handling my alcohol. I was super uncomfortable. The concert ends though, and it's time to leave. For context, this concert happened at the local reservation town site, and at the time the res did not have great cell service, so I couldn't get a hold of anyone to come and get me. So I decided to bite the bullet, and I talked him into taking the old highway instead of the 15. It sounds silly, I know, but when you take the old highway, even though it's slower, people are more willing to stop and help you than they are on the freeway. I figured that if he was having car troubles, it would be safer, and we wouldn't have people flying by us at like 80 miles per hour. So, we make it halfway between the town site and our town, and he says the car is acting funny again and pulls over. I'm stone cold sober and didn't notice anything wrong, so when I get out of the car, I go to check it out with him. He starts making comments though about how I'm drunk and I should wait in the car and that it'd be safer because you can't trust drunk Indians, especially with a little girl like you. This dude had no idea that I was actually native. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, so I checked my phone though, and I just barely have service and start texting my dad. As I'm walking away from the engine compartment, I noticed that he was watching me, so I started acting like I was trying to get cell service to get help. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched this man take the spark plug wires off the distributor cap and switch the order. Your spark plug wires connect to the distributor cap based on the order of your cylinders firing, and so doing that will either make the car run terrible or not even turn on. I managed to send my dad a picture of what he was doing, and my dad tells me to start walking. As I go to walk away, this guy gets back in the car and opens his glove box, which exposes a pistol that he had. He tells me not to worry and that we'll be safe. I probably broke a world record for how fast I was texting my dad. He starts telling me to just walk and tell the guy that he's on his way and that our friends live up the road. So I do. I start walking with a purpose and take off as quickly as I can. The guy is yelling after me and I yell back, the wind is too loud and I can't hear you. I'll be back with our friends. I'm scared out of my mind. We're 10 miles out of town with no one around. The closest road actually led to a cemetery, so there's really no one here to help me. And I get a really bad feeling the farther that I get from the car. So I turn around and look, and the hood is closed. The lights are on. So I decide to hide in the farm irrigation next to the road. I keep walking towards town and text my dad what's happening all this time. I hear a car slowly coming up behind me and see a flashlight, so I press against the side of the ditch and wait for it to pass. Once I can't hear it anymore, I crawl out and just kind of keep walking along the weeds. My dad texts me that he sees me, so when he pulls up, I run to the truck. As we make it towards the town, we actually pass the dude, and he's got like 3 cop cars around him. My dad tells me not to worry about what happened, and I heard through the grapevine later on that he had been charged with violent crimes in the past and that he'd been arrested that night for concealed carrying without a permit. The police never talked to me, but I haven't seen that guy in town ever since then. Which brings me back to why I think everyone should know at least a little bit about cars. If I didn't have experience with cars that day and didn't know what he was doing, I could have been dead in that ditch instead of hiding. Most communities have something where you can take basic car care and maintenance courses, and I highly recommend everyone takes them and at least knows the basics. This dude knew that I knew cars, but his whole goal was to get me to get drunk and then I wouldn't realize what was happening. It was a frightening experience, and these days I'm a lot more cautious. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I was brought into a hospital due to a serious infection and a large cut on my knee. Since I wasn't able to walk without taking a 30-minute break every 10 minutes, I was mostly in the room that I was given. Back then, I didn't really have a good relationship with my sister, so she barely stayed in my room. This was eventually where the problem started. On about my 3rd night of my hospitalization is when I started experiencing extreme paranoia every time that I was the only one in the room. For some reason, I always thought that someone was staring at me from the bathroom doorframe, and it was the 6th night that had confirmed my fears. My sister had been watching me when my mum was at work for a few hours. Since it was her fault, I even got the infection. I didn't talk to her and just wanted to sleep. When I woke up, the TV was off. The only light were the buttons near my bed and on my bed, and my sister was gone. I couldn't really see in the dark that well, but all of a sudden I noticed a silhouette in the doorway of the bathroom. I knew that it wasn't sleep paralysis too, because I could move just fine. So, being prone to freezing up when scared, I didn't move though. The silhouette was shaped in the form of a tall figure, and I could barely make out something was there, but there was definitely something. For what felt like hours too, that thing just stood there, and I stared at it, and I could see it more and more as my eyes adjusted to the dark that there was somebody there. And after a while, I just tried to ignore it, I guess, and I went back to sleep. And I know it's strange to say, but I could just feel it staring at me. I tried everything too, talking to it, squeezing my eyes shut, calling for one of the nurses or even my sister, and much more, but in the end I just was alone in that room with this silhouette just standing there. I ended up having to spend the whole night with it staring at me, not being able to sleep or anything. When I finally started to see the sun coming up, it just all of a sudden disappeared. I tried to tell everyone about it, and nobody believed me, saying that it was just a kid's imagination. But even years later, I think about from time to time what happened that night, and I get scared of shadows, and things shaped like what I saw those years ago, but I know what I saw. There was somebody there in that room with me that night. Who they were, what they wanted, I don't know, but I'm certain that I saw someone there, standing in the doorframe that night. This happened when I was about 16 years old, so over 20 years ago. I have 5 younger siblings, and my little sister would have been 5 years old. We lived in a pretty bad neighborhood at the time, in the housing projects pretty much, and our neighbor was nice, but she always had sketchy-looking people hanging around, especially men. But one day, too, these 2 new guys started hanging out there every day. They'd always be outside smoking or just sitting on her porch and stuff. They made me just really uncomfortable too. They were always staring at me and would sometimes try to get me to walk over and talk to them. Or they'd come over into our yard when my parents weren't home and talk to me, asking me if I had a boyfriend and asking me if I wanted some beer or weed or whatever. I was a goody two-shoes Mormon girl, so I was always like, no thank you, I have to go inside now. They were probably both around 30 years old or so, and then they started coming over and asking to use our phone when my parents weren't home. My parents always let the neighbors use our phone, so I never said no, but I would just pass it through the door and make them stay on the porch. They'd sometimes ask to come in or try to talk to me, but I would tell them no because my parents weren't home. Now I realize how dumb that was because they could have just pushed the door open, but I was raised to ignore red flags and be polite and sweet at all times. Anyway, we had a little dog and I always took him outside early in the morning on a leash. I was out one morning and one of the guys came outside and stood there staring at me for a few minutes and then went back in. I brought the dog back inside and just a few minutes later, there's a quiet knock on the door. I opened it and both the guys are there and one of them says, "Hey, we just saw your baby sister out by the highway. You need to come and get her." I panicked and ran outside with them. I started to run down our street towards the highway and one of them says, "No, we'll drive you down there. We need to hurry." I seriously took 2 steps towards their truck too before I realized what was going on. I stopped and said that I needed to go back inside and to my parents, and the man closest to me grabbed my arm and jerked me towards the truck yelling, "We have to go now, she's going to get hit by a car." I instantly felt sick and just yelled, "Let go of me." He dropped my arm and I ran back inside my house. I ran into my parents' bedroom to wake them up and my little sister was sleeping in their bed with them. I woke everyone up because I was freaking out and my dad ran outside and the guys in their truck were gone. I never did see them again either at my neighbor's house. I wish that I could say that my parents called the police or something, but they just kind of shrugged it off and made excuses like maybe they saw another kid that looked like your sister. I know deep down that that was just not the case. This is something that happened to me when I was a kid, and I just wanted to share the story since it stuck with me for so long. I was about 7 or 8 years old. Can't recall exactly, but it was around that age. And one weekend, I was visiting my grandparents, who at the time lived in the countryside. I'm from Bosnia, Europe. They were only about maybe an hour's drive away, and we went there early in the morning. Their house is in this wooded area with a long winding road leading up to each individual house, of which there weren't many, maybe 3 or 4 at most. I knew the area well though, since I went to visit almost every weekend. Besides going up to the houses, there's one section of the road that leads directly into the woods, sort of like a natural trail, I guess. Our car broke down exactly around that spot, flat tire. Since we were very close to where my grandparents live, and my folks knew that I was familiar with the area, they let me go for a walk while my dad fixed the tire. This was at about maybe 9 or 10 in the morning, so they weren't really afraid to let me run around a bit. Being the curious kid that I was, still am, I went for the forest trail since the main dirt road wasn't very exciting. The trees were very tall and dense, so even during daytime it was kind of dark. I went up the forest trail for a few hundred meters in until I came to the crossroads. Now, this was more than 20 years ago, but it left a lasting impression on me, so here's what I recall. In the middle of the crossroads, at the very point at the road's fork, there was a small sort of cave or opening of some sort. I went a bit closer and I noticed what seemed like fireflies sparkling into the pitch black hole. Not sure if fireflies even light up during the day, but that's how I remember it. Besides that, I just felt this, I don't know, it's hard to describe, but the best way I can describe it is presence, as if I wasn't alone there, as if the cavern was beckoning me to enter it. And then I noticed what seemed like several pairs of smaller red eyes peering from the darkness. At this point, I was quite spooked, thinking it was maybe an animal of some kind, and I decided not to go any further and just sort of slowly backed away. This is in Southeast Europe, so there aren't really many dangerous animals around. Pretty rarely you'll see a wolf or a bear, but that's really unusual, not near human settlements too. Anyway, nothing followed me and I had no trouble getting back. I decided not to tell my parents about this since I figured that they would be mad and wouldn't let me play unsupervised for the remainder of our visit. But they decided to leave me with my grandparents and pick me up on Monday while they went back during the afternoon. Now, I'm very close with my grandmother. She and I are very alike, especially now as a grown-up. So I told her about the encounter that I had, and she kind of laughed it off, saying, "Honey, there's nothing there, and I walk there every day," but I was adamant about what I saw, and she agreed that we'd go for a walk together and visit that spot. It wasn't far from her house, and we arrived there that same afternoon. We got to the crossroads, and just like she said, there was nothing there. No burrow or cave, just a flat spot where the crossroads met. No traces of it being dug up or buried or anything. Grandma even asked me, "Are you sure that it was here?" And I replied yes. She didn't think much of it, chalking it up to just childish imagination, but she told me not to venture out here on my own again. We continued our walk, and I just stopped mentioning the event from then on pretty much. But to this day, even after all these years, I still remember this quite vividly. I even find it strange that I'm able to recall the details. And of course, I know memories can become distorted over time, and that what we think we remember may not always be the full picture, since our minds love to fill in the blanks, but I just don't feel that this is the case. I often contemplate what would have happened had I stepped closer, or worse, tried to enter that dark cave. I've read about evil places in forests around the world, or places where time and space can become warped and things of this nature. People walking into what they describe as different timelines or alternate dimensions. And perhaps this was one of these places? I don't know, but all I can do is really speculate. My grandparents don't live there anymore too. Grandpa had passed away when I was 16 years old, and my grandma moved to the city in the same building as me and my folks. We still own the house and the land there, but I haven't been there since. My dad goes out there a few times a year just to check up on things and clean up a bit. According to him, the house or land have almost been consumed by all the vegetation around it. They cut the electricity, water, and stuff so they wouldn't have to pay bills, so it's not very convenient staying over there or anything, but I do plan on going there sometime, perhaps during my next time off or vacation from work or something. I really want to go back to that road, assuming that it still exists, and just see if I feel anything or see anything. Now that I'm an adult with an interest in the paranormal, I'm really drawn to this memory, and I just want to, try and figure out what that may have been. So on that note, I would love it if any of you guys have also experienced something similar, if you could share it. I would really appreciate to hear some of your thoughts. So let me start off by saying that paranormal is normal for my family. So ghosts, spirits, spooks, whatever you would like to call them, have never been a taboo subject for us. Growing up, you would see something and you would tell someone, and everyone listens and gives advice. And so I grew up never being afraid of the paranormal and was taught to be respectful. My whole life I've experienced paranormal activity, so it happens and I move on into my senior year of high school. Again, I was taught to respect the dead, so I've never gone like ghost hunting or tried messing with spirits or anything of the sort. If you do, that's fine. I was just taught not to, so each to their own. Anyway, senior year comes around and I was given an assignment to find ancestors in town and see how far back you could find relatives. My grandmother told me and my cousin, a junior at the time, about an old cemetery that she believed a cousin was buried in and how to get there and whatnot. So we go and find her grave and get the information. We thanked her for allowing us to gather her tombstone information and to rest in peace. The whole time we were there, my cousin and I felt very off though, like we were being watched, and not in a good way, as if there is a good way though, right? Anyway, I go home and everything is fine until I go to bed and have that same feeling. I'm laying in bed but staring at my door into the hallway and feeling as if someone is there just watching me. This continues for months too, and I thought that I was the only one who noticed until my brother, 10 at the time, started asking me if he could sleep in my room with me because he's scared of the hallway. He told me that he felt like someone was watching him from the hallway and that it felt bad. I agreed that it wasn't a pleasant energy like what a family member or maybe just a spirit passing through feels like. This was a very dark and eerie feeling. So I told him that it was fine, and we both laid in my bed staring at the hallway and felt eyes on us. We both said the Lord's Prayer and we went to bed. We're not a super religious family by any means, but me and my brother felt at that moment that we needed to say that prayer for whatever reason. I graduated high school and things calmed down a little. The feelings seemed to go away is what I mean. Until that morning. You see, my mum went to work and my brother went to school. I got up and I got in the shower, and as I was washing my hair, a heavy feeling just crashed down on me, and again I felt like I was being watched. I turned my head to look to the side, and there, on the other side of the distorted glass shower door, was a tall, dark figure. I could see a head and shoulders, but no other features except the red eyes. I screamed and threw open the shower door, and as soon as I opened it, it was gone. I quickly closed the door to check if it was still there, but whatever was there was now missing. Quickly, I got out, getting dressed, wrapping my shampooed hair in a towel, and leaving the house, going straight to my grandmother's, and told her everything, bawling my eyes out. She looked as scared as I did. My grandmother believes that it was a shadow person. Me and my mother had been fighting a lot, as well as full-blown screaming matches, which we never did before the trip to the cemetery. Grandma called my mum and they called someone to cleanse our house. I never went back after that though, and I moved out because I was just too scared to go back. My mum sold the house, and I still get horrible feelings when I drive by it. And that is the worst paranormal experience I've ever had, but I have years of stories. I'm currently 29, so there's a fair few of them, but if anyone wants more, I can definitely share more. Honestly though, be careful where you go and what you bring home with you. Don't make the same mistake that I did. I have no idea who or what it was, but I'm now terrified of that house, and it took almost a year before I stopped having panic attacks in the shower after it too, because, man, it was frightening. To give a little bit of context, I used to work in an apartment complex, and as a result, I've had my fair share of creepy encounters, I guess you could say. Most residents, they keep to themselves and don't cause issues, probably about maybe 95%, but the other 5% took up almost all of my time. Isaac was one of the 5%. When he first rented his apartment, he definitely had stoner vibes, but he was nice enough and passed his background check. Almost immediately, though, he started causing issues. The lady next door complained that she could smell his smoke constantly. The guy downstairs complained that he could hear his stereo all hours of the day and night. Another resident accused him of following him home one night. The police were regularly there, breaking up fights between him and his girlfriends too. We caught him hiding 2 large dogs in his apartment, and he regularly let them run loose, which ultimately resulted in another dog and 2 people getting attacked, and he accidentally discharged a gun in his apartment once too. Needless to say, he caused a lot of issues. At first, he was very apologetic and said that he would make an effort to remedy the problems, but things just kept getting worse, and after a year of weekly calls or notices from the office, he eventually became standoffish. One morning too, I received a call from Isaac letting me know that he'd broken up with one of his girls and she wouldn't leave the apartment. He asked me to personally come up and remove her. I'm a small woman, so even if I wanted to take the risk, I physically wouldn't be able to wrestle an angry woman out of the apartment. I suggested that he call the police, but he then asked if I could make a maintenance man come up to remove her. I offered to call the police on his behalf, but Isaac said that he didn't want to involve them and hung up. A few hours later, Isaac came down to the office with a jump drive and said that he needed to print out a 50-plus page document. Residents weren't technically allowed to use our officer printer, but on the rare occasion someone asked to, I usually didn't say no. It was an easy way to build good rapport after all, but between Isaac becoming such a problem tenant and how large his document was, I told him that I couldn't print his document. I gave the excuse that our paper, toner, or printer history was monitored, and we would get in trouble for printing such a large document out for him. Not liking my answer, he started screaming all sorts of obscenities, and he accused me of being useless, bringing up my refusal to fight his ex and power tripping, and he called me names multiple times and said someone needed to bring me down a peg and stuff like this. I was pretty over him at this point and told him that if he was going to behave like a child, that he needed to leave. He told me that I couldn't make him, and bluntly I told him that he would leave or I would call the police and have him removed. I also told him that I would ban him from the office going forward. Normally, I try to kill the residents with kindness, but his lease was ending in a week and I didn't care anymore if he hated me. My threat? It seemed to work too. He angrily knocked my pen holder over and then slammed both doors hard as he left. The following morning, though, there was a police officer waiting for me when I got to work. He asked if Isaac was a resident, and I confirmed that he was. The officer explained that the body of a person had been discovered the day before, and Isaac was apparently their prime suspect. He was the last person to text this person, asking him to meet him where this body was, and he was found shortly after the message. The police believed that Isaac had been paid to kill him, and based on the timing of the text and when the boy was discovered, Isaac would have had to have left my office and pretty much gone directly there. And that is pretty terrifying to think about. Ultimately, the police wanted to use Isaac's move-out day as an opportunity to try and catch him. But to nobody's surprise, he didn't show up. When I walked his apartment to inspect for damage, and there was a lot, I found a bank receipt from the day of the murder. Someone had wired him $17,000. Thankfully, I never did see Isaac again, but I did find out that he was caught in another country a few months later and is now in prison. I really discovered a love for walking and later hiking over lockdown. There were days that I would spend hours out traveling the country roads, across fields and through the woods. I live on the outskirts of a small town in Ireland, so the walks were a great form of exercise without using a gym. It started with me and my dad, just going out for about an hour every day, but he knew that I wanted more and told me to go on my own if he wasn't up for it, or if I wanted to go further than usual. It was around July of 2021. I was 14 at the time, and even though the lockdown was starting to ease, I still went walking. I decided to walk through fields instead of the roads because having to stop for cars really irks me. I came to a plot of land with trees planted and decided to splash the boots before turning back. I was almost finished too when I started hearing laughter from behind me. I pulled up my zip and buckled my belt to face whoever was there, and I was surprised to see 5 people. None of them could have been much older than me, and one of them waved and I walked towards them. They were between me and my way back home, so I sort of had to anyway. But the group had been talking amongst themselves, but stopped when I met them. There were 3 boys and 2 girls. They all had bags or backpacks and were all similarly dressed in sort of dark graphic t-shirts. I remember one specifically had a Thrasher t-shirt as well, and black cargos with funny-looking keychains. A bit of a weird sight considering things like skate culture aren't really big where I am from, and anyone who's ever owned a nice piece of clothing wouldn't wear it out in a place where they could trip into a cowpat. Anyway, the guy with the Thrasher t-shirt smiled and asked, "What are you doing out here?" I realized that it must have been a bit weird to meet a stranger in the absolute, pretty much back of nowhere, so I just said, I'm taking a shortcut through the back road." Another boy chimes in and says, "Don't lie, I saw you taking a pee in the woods." It dawned on me that they were both too well spoken to be anyone local. I felt a little bit intimidated, to be honest, so I just told him nature was calling, as jokingly as I could, to which they all laughed. I wasn't sure if it was my accent that they found funny or the fact that they caught me where I was and I was made visibly embarrassed, but One of the two girls breaks from the laughter and pulls a face of disgust. She says, "What are you doing with that necklace?" referring to the cross necklace that I was wearing. It didn't really scan with me how serious she was, so I just let out a chuckle, but the four others stopped laughing. The girl who spoke pulled out a book from a tote bag that she had worn over her shoulder and said, "You've probably already ruined this by weeing everywhere on the ground anyway," as if I was supposed to know what this was. But the five of them all genuinely looked gutted, as if I had just genuinely ruined their day or something. I responded with, "I don't really know what you mean." And all of a sudden, a bleating noise came out from the Thrasher guy's bag. I look at him and the group starts to act sort of skittish. The girl with the book says, "Let's just look for a good spot," and walks past me. I turn and see the Thrasher guy's backpack looks sort of lumpy. At the time, I really didn't know what was in there, but as I was nearly home, around 40 minutes later, I walked past a field with sheep and I realized that they must have stolen an animal from one of the farms. I told my parents later that day that I was away cycling. I took the bike as far away as I could and jogged to where I last saw the group disappear into the trees. I look around and there was a dead lamb with several shallow gashes all over it, with some of its wool almost pulled out. The number 5 in blue spray paint was still partly visible as well. I'm guessing that they left it there after cutting it and it bled out and died. I don't believe in that satanic panic antichrist thing, but I know that they were probably sacrificing this lamb for some reason or another. I was helping my friend, who I told this story to, with farmhand work the week after, and all of his livestock were accounted for, meaning that I have a rough idea of which field they got this sheep from. But I didn't want to ask the owner in case he thought that I had something to do with its disappearance. Me and my friend went back to the wooded area too, because I didn't want him to think that I was messing with him, that I was being truthful and honest, but after that, I haven't been back since. I've been working on 2 Native American reservations for about a year and a half now. On the current reservation, I have not had any memorable experiences with the paranormal, but last year I had multiple at the other. The first started when I was sleeping in the basement of the house that I was in, due to not having enough rooms. I was laying on my bed trying to sleep, but was unable due to too much light coming in, and I was night shift. As I lay there, I heard a cardboard box with some of my belongings in it drag across the floor. I turned and looked at the direction the sound came from and didn't see anything. I got up, walked around into the room. Nothing looked out of place, but I couldn't remember if that's where I left it, so I went back to bed, and when I lay down I heard footsteps above me, but I knew that nobody else was in the home. I just sort of ignored it, and eventually I fell asleep. Later I found out other people heard footsteps in that house too, and another person saw a shadow person later in the basement. Anyway, when I came back a month later, I was in a different home. After about 2 weeks, I was laying in my bed on my phone when I heard a very loud knocking on my bedside table, 3 of them, right behind me. I turned to look, but saw nothing. A friend attempted to replicate on the window and the door, and nothing sounded the same other than that table. Less than a week from then, I rolled from one side of the bed to the other, and as I rolled, I saw an approximately 3-foot tall, all-black shadow run across the foot of the bed, and I can tell you that I almost soiled myself when I saw it. I asked locals if they knew anything like that and was told about Wawila. I'm unsure of the spelling or pronunciation, but there are little people that play pranks apparently. After that, I never had another experience in that home after seeing it, but where I was working, there were many stories of different spirits in different areas of the facility. Late at night, walking around, I always felt like I was being watched too. One night I was sitting in my chair when, in the corner of my eye, I saw a tall opaque shadow walk into the room and disappear into the shadow of a door. I let it go as the other person in the room didn't see anything, but then they had to leave, making me the only person in that room, and as I looked up, I see movement on the blinds, similar to a faint shadow of a tallish man sit down, wearing a hat of all things. I freaked out and I left until she came back. I asked other employees and they said that corner used to have their table and chair and that they've seen that man come in many times and sit there. Obviously, I can't confirm their sightings, but what I can confirm is my own eyes. I know what I saw and it was there, and it's scary to think about.